Okay, good morning to you all. This is the meeting of the Gwent Police and Crime Panel. We're holding it at the Chamber County Hall at Usk. And we start off, could we first of all have the Police Commissioner and everyone to announce who they are, starting with Sean?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Sean Curley. I'm the Commissioner's Chief of Staff.
Julian Williams, Chief Constable.
Jeff Cuthbert, Police and Crime Commissioner for Gwent.
Larry Thomas, Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner for Gwent.
And good morning, I'm Ian Roberts. I'm a Superintendent. I head up the Force Communication Suite.
Peter Nuttall, Co-opted Member.
Jill Howells, Co-opted Member and Vice Chair.
Kath Forbes-Thompson, Lead Officer for the panel.
John Guy, Chairman.
William Routley, Newport City Council.
Mike Jeremiah, Torvine Borough Council.
Matthew Ford, Torvine Borough Council.
Neil Taylor, Head of Performance and Planning for the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner.
Tony Easton, County Council, Monmouth County Council.
Stuart Healy, Blind Gwent County Borough Council.
Lisa Winnett, Blind Gwent County Borough Council.
Chris Forehead, Caerphilly County Borough Council.
Right, if we could start now with the agenda. First of all, any declarations of interest. Anyone that's made a declaration of interest previously, that's recorded. Any other new declarations of interest? Okay, nothing on that. We now move on to item 2, apologies for absence.
We have some apologies from Councillor Colin Mann and Councillor Jez Kirby, and then the apologies noted on the sheet.
We now move on to item 3, is to approve and sign the minutes of the Gwent Police Crime Panel held on the 1st of August 2017. Can we have affirmation that we agree to the minutes? Can we have a proposer?
Move the item, Chair.
And a seconder?
Second.
Thank you very much. We now move on to item 4, which is the verbal update by the Police and Crime Commissioner for Gwent, and pages 3 to 14.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's a pleasure to present my report. As you'll have seen, there is actually a written report. I won't go through it item by item, but obviously at the end I'll take pertinent questions. But there are a few things that I would like to highlight. Oh, there we are, £10 in the box.
I did say ring me as soon as we get in and apologise.
One thing that, of course, has happened very recently and is therefore not referred to in the report is the announcement, really, of the police pay, for example, the 1% plus the 1% bonus, and the indication or suggestion from the Justice Minister that this ought to be met out of reserves. And this is for all police forces across England and Wales, not just Gwent. That's an issue that's causing us some concern, and combined with issues around finance, in terms of we're still waiting for the announcement of whatever the police funding formula is going to be and our settlement, and time is marching on, does lead to some uncertainty. There will be representations made strongly to government on behalf of the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners and the National Police Chiefs Council on the merit or otherwise of expecting reserves to be used to pay ongoing revenue costs. But there'll be more information on that in due course. Turning to the actual report, some of the things I would just like to highlight at this stage. Certainly in terms of the Partnership Fund, you'll notice that the very popular Partnership Fund, I'm changing the criteria. The existing fund that's been there for a few years has done some very, very good work indeed in terms of providing badly needed resources for a range of organisations. But one thing that I've felt for a little while, and now confirmed it, is that whilst I don't doubt the merit or otherwise of the way in which the money's been used by those groups to enhance their work, it's a little bit hit and miss. The scheme as it is always hopelessly oversubscribed, something like threefold on the last one, the current scheme. and therefore most of the organisations submitting bids only had a proportion of the monies that they wanted. I'm going to change that, especially at a time when the money for youth work is gradually shrinking. I want to use the monies that we have, in the order of about £300,000 from the Proceeds of Crime Act, to focus on those areas of Gwent that are in the greatest of need. I'll also be using it as an opportunity to build better relationships between the neighbourhood police team and key organisations and individuals who are active within their communities. And much of the decision making now will be based very firmly on recommendations from neighbourhood policing teams about the sort of organisations to support and the work that they do. And there'll be good liaison and relationship between the neighbourhood teams and those organisations to make sure the money's been used properly. And that will then help young people in particular, because there will be a focus on young people's development, to have a much more positive attitude towards authority in general and the police in particular. We'll be keeping a small sum, about £20,000 back for, if you like, emergency grants that may be necessary as time goes on, if a particular good scheme suddenly emerges. So we've got something we could do to support it. But that's the change in the way in which the Partnership Fund will operate from the next financial year. And very soon I'll be making public announcements so people understand the changes that are going to happen. I think it tallies in very well with the Police and Crime Plan. It's very much part of diversionary activities, which can only lead, in my view, to helping to reduce the amount of crime later on by preventative measures. In terms of the Women's Pathfinder, we are still committed to an all-Wales approach, and we're working with the 3 other Police and Crime Commissioners to try and develop a formula and a programme that we can all sign up to. We're not there yet. The advice I've received is that we're unlikely to reach a meaningful agreement by the 1st of April next year, which was the original target. And therefore, I have agreed on behalf of Gwent PCC that we will extend the current arrangements for a further 6 months, on the proviso, of course, that everybody is committed to trying to get a working agreement by September of next year. In terms of public engagements, as you'll know, this is a key aspect of my work. I believe very much in getting out and about, meeting people, councils, town councils, residents groups, and indeed individuals. And that programme, that cycle of activities will continue. I'm about to launch another round of one-to-one public surgeries and indeed walkabouts through the towns and communities of Gwent in a planned way. Hopefully I'll get 2 cycles of visits to each of the local authorities in terms of surgeries, and there'll be the venues will be different towns in the 5 counties. Community safety is a very important piece of our work in terms of crime prevention and community cohesion and tackling antisocial behaviour. Safer Gwent continues its good work. It's often regarded as an exemplar way of working by other police services across England and Wales. We're working closely with the Welsh Government on the Wales Audit Office report on and review on community safety in Wales, and indeed we are hosting a conference jointly with the Welsh Government on the 27th of September in Cwmbran, which is to bring in relevant organisations to hear about the way in which the Welsh Government, as a result of the Wales Audit Office, intends to progress the issues of community safety. One key issue that's a key plank of my work during this next 12 months and beyond is, of course, the estate strategy. Very much part of my portfolio. Imminently, we're going to make announcements about the way in which the location of police stations are not going to change in that sense. I made an absolute pledge that we're not withdrawing from any communities, but we are going to develop what we call a hub and spoke model, where there will be hubs where the police will be based to a large extent, ready to respond, good transport and links and networks from those hubs, both in terms of cyber as well as physical roads and what have you. And the spokes will be places located in each of our towns and communities that can be the main focus point for members of the public. We've just opened a new police station in Caerphilly, and I was delighted that Jill was able to attend on behalf of the panel, and that's an example of the way in which we intend to carry out the future engagement with people through the estate strategy. One aspect that I must bring to your attention, and those of you who have been on the panel for some time will be aware of the discussions of a new headquarters. We're now in a position where we are ready to move. We've had negotiations with the Welsh Government in terms of securing the land in Llantarnam, and we'll be making public announcements very soon. There'll obviously be wide consultation with staff and indeed interested parties like yourselves about that facility. The current facility, as you know, we've been in it for over 40 years. It is a building that is falling down. I think that's not an exaggeration. The roof is leaking badly in many places. And quite frankly, it's far too big for modern day policing needs in Gwent. We'll be moving to a more sustainable building, as carbon neutral as possible, which will be built to the highest of standards, but it will be a fit for purpose building. That's why it's important to consult with staff in particular and other interested parties about its eventual design and construction. That new headquarters will be costing somewhere in the order of £16 million, which I know sounds like an awful lot of money, and by itself, of course it is. But to bring our current building up to a modern day specification will cost even more. And therefore we think, bearing in mind there'll be capital receipts from the sale of the new building, we're obviously going to try and maximise those to the very best of our ability, that the right thing to do is to move to a new building. Now the money's been secured over a period of many years. In fact, the money was secured before I became the Police and Crime Commissioner. So basically I'm bringing to a head now the issues that have built up for some time, and we're able to take those decisions and to go forward. I'll be making public announcements very soon, quite possibly by the beginning of next week, so that people will know. I dare say there'll be a bit of mischief making, there'll be a few issues raised, but I'm quite convinced that the business case is a very solid case indeed, and that any reasonable-minded person upon seeing that business case would agree it's the right thing to do at this time. Of course, since the last full meeting of this panel to consider the scrutiny issues, you have met to confirm the appointment of Julian Williams as the Chief Constable, and one of the things, first things that we did was to appoint a new interim Deputy Chief Constable, Pam Kelly, and I'm sure that the Chief will refer to that when he makes his statement to you after me. I'm also very pleased that we've had a visit from Nick Hurd MP, who is the Policing Minister, or now Policing and Fire Minister at the UK Government. He came to see us. We were actually the first police service outside of the Met that he came to see upon taking up his new post. We had a very good discussion. He asked me a lot of questions, including what I thought of the 1% pay cap for public sector workers, so I told him. He didn't say he necessarily agreed with my views, but he acknowledged them. Things appear to be happening there, although that's, outside our remit directly. And he certainly had a very good visit to our Missing Children's Hub and the Polit team. So he seemed to find it very useful. He was very generous in his messages on Twitter about how welcoming and how effective he thought the visit was. The final thing I want to say is about my work on the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners. I'm now been appointed as a member of the board of the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners. I'll be attending my first full meeting on Monday. Looking forward to that very much, but I've taken part in a few telephone conferences, and there's a lot of work ahead for that body, as there is indeed with the National Police Chiefs Council, not least of which is making the case for greater resources for policing and the emergency services with the Home Secretary and the Chancellor. I'll leave it there, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, for that detail. First question is Lisa.
Thank you, Chair. Regarding 1.2, it is with the partnership funding. I've got a question on it, but what concerns me regarding what you just told us as well, where you're stating our neighbourhood officers will be the ones helping to put projects forward. Could that lead, this is what my concern is regarding for the officers, where, say, for example, they've put forward 4 projects then, and only 2 of them are accepted, 2 are rejected. It could, as far as I'm concerned, lead them to have an abuse then of the ones that's been rejected. And that's my concern. We're supposed to be working together. If the officers are putting things forward and those groups are not accepted, it can then cause conflict. It can, instead of building relationships. Like it states in here that there's going to be an impact on the change that you've done, on the ones that had been coming forward. Can you please expand on the impact? Because obviously you've done research, because it states it here, because you don't state on what impact it's going to have on the others. Then when we come to 1.3, it's fantastic what you're doing with the Women's Pathfinder Division Scheme, and it really is. But I'd like to know what you're doing for men in the same situation as well, because it shouldn't just be about women. And, I applaud what's going on, but something needs to be done. Then on 3.1, the engagements that you've been having, which is fantastic, have you been able to form any outcomes from those engagements? From what you are picking up from the public, is there anything that we can move forward with on there? Moving on to 4.1 as well, and that includes 4.2 regarding the Safer Gwent updating the community safety review. In line with the budgets now being cut for borough councils, and borough councils looking at which way to save money on non-essential services, there's a big threat to CCTV being stopped then by borough councils because they can't afford it, because the money's got to go into essential services. So what are your plans going forward? Say, for example, I'm just using this hypothetically, Blaen and Gwent say, right, we are going to stop the CCTV in our borough because we can't afford it. The amount of bags of evidence that's gained, from that CCTV to help solve the crimes is going to have an impact then on the crime figures. So where are you as a commissioner going to help towards keeping the CCTV in boroughs? Because one, yes, it's a borough council issue, but it is also a police issue as well. And that's what my concerns are, of what effect it's going to have if we do end up losing it. And then regarding 5.1, the police estate strategy, I actually went on the website last night, on the Commissioner's website, to have a look at the police estate strategy. One thing is very out of date, and I'll use my ward as well as an example. It states about Blaen Police Station being shut to have work done on it, and that was dated 21st of the 11th, 2016. Well, actually, it was only shut for about 3-4 days, if you remember, Jeff, at the time, because, there was a big hoo-ha regarding it. Well, that hasn't been updated, so your website is informing people that the station is shut. Another point as well, on what concerns me, on that page, it says, several of the stations are stating they're not going to be sold. So it gives the impression that you were saying the other ones then, that doesn't have that statement, are going to be sold. And I'd like to know, I know we've got this state strategy on the agenda for next month, but going forward, I want to know your plans with the specific buildings, because the website gives an impression that, right, that station, and that station is going to be closed. These are not going to be sold. It's giving out a bad message, your website is, and, it can cause a lot of unrest then, put it that way, because people fought long and hard and, to keep those stations, and including the last commissioner, it was, said that no police stations were closing. I got concerns regarding collaboration, as you know that I brought it up previously because of what's going on with Absalady Station, with the police being in there with the fire. That's not working good, and then there's the reassurance people need that that station is going to be there. Sorry for all the load of questions.
That's okay. Thank you very much, I think. On the specific question of the Pathfinder scheme, I'm going to bring a lady, my deputy, in to respond to that point. But look, in terms of the other points, I still have a very positive view of the changes to the Partnership One way of working, and my understanding is that so do the neighbourhood teams, and that there will be discussions on this. I mean, there are quite a number of organisations now that don't get through the first stage of the current partnership fund. And disappointment, of course, is felt by those organisations. But it's very much about patient explanation, about why criteria may not have been met. The easiest thing to do, I suppose, would not to bother with the distribution of monies in the way that I've outlined and just decide on a particular theme and just invest money in that from the Proceeds of Crime Act. But I believe very much in trying to help local organisations, to give them that extra resource. After all, volunteering is very important to us, and I want to provide that support where I can. And as I've said, I want to focus on the most disadvantaged areas. Now, clearly, we will monitor very carefully the results of the first year's approach. And if there are issues that arise, then we will try to deal with them. Decision-taking, and we'll make this very clear, will be me. That'll be my responsibility. I will have to decide. But I will take recommendations from the local neighbourhood teams, and I expect them to work closely with organisations and to explain the criteria in terms of working, for example, with disadvantaged young people who are maybe in danger of coming into the criminal justice system if something isn't done to help them to change their ways. So yes, I'll be conscious of the fact that some organisations may be disappointed. We'll have to try and manage that to the best of our ability, but in many respects that's the same as it is now with organisations that don't get any grant or indeed have it greatly reduced. So that's not going to be particularly new to us. I'll come back to O'Leary in a moment. In terms of the other points, for me, the outcomes of engagement, well, I think that's been reflected in the police and crime plan from my first year, and indeed in the terms of the annual report, which we'll be discussing later. Clearly, in terms of the one-to-one private surveys, surgeries, if you like, they deal with issues mainly that affects that individual. And that can vary from poor police response, or at least that's the perception of it, to antisocial behaviour that they want to make sure that we're aware of. So we look at those on an individual basis. More generally, in terms when I meet councils or town councils, full councils, individual groups of residents, that has been reflected. The commonest thing that's raised with me is police visibility. No one will be surprised to hear that, the uniform presence on the street. People want the reassurance that a uniform presence, and indeed police stations, can bring. And I truly believe that that's reflected within the plan and is clearly, therefore, one of my major priorities. In terms of the financial pressures on councils, yes, I'm fully aware of that. That's been the case since the austerity programme began. Wales is a bit better served than equivalent councils in England in terms of pressures and cuts. But I can understand the issue around CCTV. Now, that's undoubtedly one of the issues that will be dealt with in the conference that we're having jointly with the Welsh Government in terms of the Welsh Audit Office review. we need to see. You're quite right. That has historically been the issue of a matter for local authorities to decide whether to be located, and certainly they can produce good evidence that can be used in terms of solving crime and prosecuting perpetrators. I don't dispute that. So I would imagine that those discussions will continue, and we'll need to see where we can go in terms of crime prevention and crime solving on that matter. And as I say, I expect it to be a feature of that conference and ongoing work. In terms of the matter you raise with the estate, clearly I'm a little embarrassed that what's on our public website is out of date. That's a matter I'm going to take up straight away when I get back to make sure that that is corrected, especially in terms of Blaenau. I do indeed remember the issues there. We want to make sure that the information that's on there is as up to date as it possibly can be. I have actually raised this before, so I'm going to have to go back and say that where potentially statements that are potentially could be misconstrued, such as this statement, this station is not going to be sold, that shouldn't appear, because of course it can give the impression that maybe the others are. The reason that was there historically is because there had been rumours, and I'm talking over years now, that a station was about to be closed, so an explicit statement was put. But I don't think that's relevant now. And I'll certainly review what you say in terms of the website and make sure that it's corrected so there's misperceptions are not being continued. In terms of Abertillery, I mean, our view is that that arrangement is working well. The Chief may well want to comment on that later when he gives his update also. Can I ask now Larry to deal with the Pathfinder issue?
Certainly, thank you, Commissioner, and thank you for the question. The update is in relation to the Women's Pathfinder, which we currently collaborate with the other 3 police services across Wales. In Gwent, we have a development to ensure that we've got a similar development alongside the Women's Pathfinder for men, and that is quite a well-developed proposal that the team are working jointly with the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner and Gwent Police to ensure that we have got a scheme that will be rolled out for men along the same lines as for women, in particular targeting the 18 to 25 young people, ex-army personnel and servicemen, and then more generally the same ethos, really trying to divert people from the criminal justice system.
Thank you for that. The only one other little part they missed is, going back to the estates, it was, can we have an update in the fairly near future, hopefully for next meeting, because I know it's agendaed on that, on where you are going with police stations as well, our local ones, because it's a question we're asked in our areas all the time, because residents have got great concerns regarding it. Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. That is work in hand, but I'll make sure that we have something that's as clear as it can be for our next meeting.
Can I raise a question, John? Yeah, thank you. And I notice there's been a terror explosion in London. It's to do with the partnership fund refocus. You make the comment on your report that in future potential recipients will be actively sought out, and then further on to provide support for Gwent's most disadvantaged areas. I'd like to know how that would really work in terms of areas which are not seen to be disadvantaged in some respects, but do have a positive effect on the youngsters in the communities. In particular, as one in my ward, where collaboration between Torfaen and Monmouthshire, we got a rice care centre for youngsters with disabilities and problems. Now, they would, in my mind, fall out of your rules and regulations of the running of the scheme if it was looked at in the round, but it's a broader thing than just disadvantageousness. Could you comment on that? And they say there's been an explosion in London Tube Station.
Yes, certainly. Yeah, Parsons Green station, we're aware of that as tragedy. What we don't quite know what's happened yet, so we shouldn't really speculate. But it's a serious situation, clearly. In terms of the partnership fund, which we probably won't call a partnership fund, we're thinking of perhaps a better title for it now to reflect what it hopes to achieve. We've got a number of tools at our disposal in terms of identifying the areas in greatest need. And I know you're talking about areas which may not be identified as such, but we can use the Welsh Index of Multiple Deprivation, for example, but also one of the reasons why I want to place a great emphasis on the neighbourhood policing teams is that I expect the neighbourhood policing teams to understand their local area. And to be able to identify organisations or individuals that can help in this. That's not to say that we won't consider applications via neighbourhood policing teams from parts of Gwent which may not be categorised as amongst the most deprived in the Welsh Index of Multiple Deprivation or by other tools. And we'll look at things, and hopefully we'll do that in as fair a way as we can. But we only have about £300,000, which, you know, is a lot of money in one sense, but it's easily used up. And it is my belief that I want to help the areas of greatest need. There are enormous pressures, particularly on youth work funding right across across Wales and across the UK, come to that. I'm not suggesting we're going to replace all that money, so that's just not possible, but perhaps we can set a good example and make a contribution. As I've said, I believe it does support one of the key objectives within my plan, that of crime reduction, crime prevention, and hopefully preventing young people who might otherwise be in danger of coming into the criminal justice system.
Commissioner, concerning page 311, the launch of the pilot security scheme, can I say that is certainly a fantastic thing, in that vulnerable people often at risk for all sorts of reasons, particularly when they go into hospital and everything. And I see that it's mentioned that dependent upon its success. I'm just wondering, you know, how things are developed on that.
Yeah, well, we're going to keep that under review. I expect to get reports back very soon now, and then we'll try and reach some conclusions and see where we're at.
Any other questions? No. Okay, we now move on to the verbal update of the Chief Constable.
Thank you. I believe there's a presentation which you can see. It's about 7 or 8 slides. And I'll talk to it, and please feel free to answer any questions as we go along. What the Commissioner has asked me to do is outline the vision I presented to him and the people on the interview panel, which I think I presented to yourselves really at the confirmation hearing, but I'll just rehearse that for you. And then how we are spending in force the investment plan, which is due to the money saved, the accelerated savings plan this year, just to give you an update on why that's there and how we're spending it. And that'll be it, if that's okay. Okay, so in relation to my vision, of course, it's directly linked to, and it would have to be to the police and crime plan, and the Commissioner's vision. It would be wrong for me to enter that first of all without saying what I see as the challenges for us as a force and the service nationally. And again, I'll rehearse them. They are the funding picture. It's a bit unclear at the moment, as the Commissioner has said. The national funding formula, the grant, we don't know where we are. Probably around December, which will allow us to adjust our medium-term financial plan. Secondly, as you will know as well, the entry points to the police service, whether that be apprenticeship. I think we're probably down that route now by 2019, 2020. So I think that is sown across the whole of Wales and England in all probability, but the funding for that, especially when students, as police officers as they will be towards the end of their third-year degree programme. That'll cost £10 million in Wales alone. And the funding for that, if it doesn't come from elsewhere, will impact, of course, on the funding we have internally. Also linked to that, the police education qualification framework as well. So it's a bit complex at the moment, but I know the Commissioner has got a point on the agenda in relation to that later, and of course I'll take any questions as well. Secondly, the complexity of the morale issue amongst police officers and police staff across the service at the moment. And again, it was mentioned earlier about the incident in London, the possible terror issue, and it's well documented across South Wales and Gwent, the issues that officers and staff face at the moment, a reduction in numbers, a perception of increased demand where people could have joined, like myself, 28 years ago, and will deal with totally different demand issues than when they initially joined. That's causing anxiety amongst certain people, and there's a need to value, motivate and engage with them. Thirdly, the changing nature of the crime picture, i.e. it's been mentioned, cyber, human trafficking, child sexual exploitation. And as Superintendent Roberts will know they're much more complex than dealing with the crimes we've traditionally been dealing with. Even when you get a complex burglary, which is horrific, it's a very personal crime, or GBH, grievous bodily harm, the ability to deal with a historical child sexual exploitation, missing person issue really does lead to partnership, confidence, victim care issues, which on occasions just do not get resolved because people, whatever part of the world they come from, will not engage with us, unfortunately. The fourth challenge you see is very much ongoing collaboration, and it's been mentioned about Abertillery, of course. Those are opportunities going forward, and I'd say with any sort of collaboration, there are positives and negatives, and we have to work our way through them. But I would hope that the fire service and ambulance service I've got good relationships with us, whether that be due to first point of contact right to the issue of resolution at the end. And I see ourselves as 3 emergency services. You could even bring in the RNLI, you can voluntary organisation St John's, have to adapt the way we deal with issues together to ensure that we are citizen focused. But it's an evolving plan anyway, and it's not lost on us, the challenges with that. Fifthly, the emergence of IT and the best way to deal with that. Obviously, from a criminal's point of view, how they get into our systems. You look at the right then, DDoS attacks, denial of service attacks, right to the individual who's sitting at home, who's challenged by the fact that someone in a different part of the world is taking money from them. Very complex, but it allows us to react in different ways. And I can assure you the majority of our officers and staff are up for that challenge moving forward, and it's very exciting for us. Number 6, public confidence. Commissioner has already mentioned visibility, accessibility, estate. I think Sian is going to take over from me then at that point, but not. Oh, there we are. That's always useful. That's always useful to move on to the slide I'm talking about. It was, of course, a ploy of mine, but apologise. So that's number 6. Number 7 is demand, and HMIC in the State of Policing report across the whole of the service said the inability of some forces to assess demand is a real challenge going forward. I don't think we're perfect by any means, to be honest with you. I don't think we're perfect at all. I don't think UK policing is, but I think we've got a good foundation to assess that. And the last one is the accountability regime we have in policing. HMIC are coming into the force now in the 2nd of October in relation to our effectiveness inspection. It's a risk-based inspection because we did well last year. An area of weakness was serious and organised crime. I think we've adapted greatly in relation to that, and some of the issues such as Operation Jewel, and some of the issues which I hope you can understand I can't discuss here because the COVID activities. I hope we've come on leaps and bounds in relation to that, the mental health and vulnerability as well. So the accountability regime is extensive, and it does take for a lot of planning. I won't mention, well, I will mention the Commissioner's plan, but I won't go into detail because I think he's already covered it. But this vision directly links into that. What it also links into is Policing Vision 2025. That is a vision that's been determined by the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners and National Police Chiefs Council. And it contains, strangely enough, about 6 bubbles around it, which will be legitimacy, local policing, specialist capability, CSE, human trafficking, serious and organised crime. Workforce, key part of it. A key part of it for me as a Chief Constable is the people we've got internally, respect for them, valuing them, motivating them, giving them tools to do their job. Digital platforms, working across partnerships, and enablers as well, which will be backroom services, i.e. finance, IT, etc. If I go into mine, is to make sure that Gwent is provides a values-based service. For me, that is, as was on the first side, ensuring that the people who join the organisation, when they were in the organisation, until they leave the organisation and beyond, have certain values. I would hope they join with those. The staff within the organisation, my colleagues, decided upon those values themselves. I think they're still very, very pertinent. They are to be caring, fair, trusted, professional, responsive. I don't want to change those, and I think the staff have selected them. I think they're very, very good. How will we do that? Ensure people have that. As soon as they join, those values are impressed on them. During the interviews, those values are impressed on them. I meet, if I can, every probationer intake. You can see the extensive amount of probationer constables we're taking in, and impress on them what is important to me, what is important to yourselves, what is important to the Commissioner, and of course, most importantly, what's important to the public and what they should be doing. That's impressed right at the start from me. Myself and my team and superintendents, chief supers, who are key in operational leadership throughout the force and key deliverers, are attempting, and I hope you see that, to be as visible as they can. So we speak one-to-one with individual officers and staff. I think that's key to morale, and again, identifying problems as well. And thirdly, we've got an ethics committee, which is selected from individual members of the public, members of the IAG. We've got some students on there, which I think is very, very important, because you've got a student population in Gwent, and we need to identify what younger people are thinking, what their interactions are with them. And of course, we've got some of our officers and staff, because it's pointless implementing processes and policies. We're actually engaging with the people who are going to deliver them, because they won't agree with them and they won't deliver them. So that's key to the values. Secondly, and again, probably one of my most important things, and has been throughout my time in the police service, ensure that we value the work that people do in the organisation. We value partners like yourselves, Commissioner's Office, and that's generally just often by speaking to people, rewarding people, understanding their issues, and ensure we motivate, provide a skilled and engaged workforce. That's through a number of areas, and we speak about it later. Having opportunities to develop issues themselves, having the right type of training. We changed that dramatically, fortunately, to the amount of funding we've been able to have this year, and I think that will really motivate and boost staff and be a different way in developing their skills. Thirdly, to ensure we've got a citizen-focused service, 3 key areas. That's local policing area structures. You've got 10 uniform inspectors who serve yourself within the communities. That is a key part of the delivery. Secondly, our strategic equality plan, that we apply our powers such as stop and search use of force proportionately across Gwent Police, and we understand the issues that causes, and that links directly to community cohesion. And thirdly, as the Commissioner has said, the estates plan is very, very important and links into public confidence, operational deployment, and of course the funding envelope that we have. Fourthly, we need to enhance our response to emerging threats. I think we've been groundbreaking in relation to certain areas of mental health, cybercrime, as I mentioned earlier to a couple of people. I wish I could say I was responsible for that, but I'm not. It's other people in the organisation who've done a tremendous job, who've been allowed to develop pathways, and they've been very, very successful. Mission Children's Team is also an example of that. We also have, by developing our local policing area structure, placed public protection units out on our local policing areas, which I think makes a big difference. And we do, you've seen the issues with the hurricane in Florida, what's happening up in London, what's happening in Manchester. We continually have to assess in relation to specialist capability and emerging threats, national demands, because I can assure you, officers from this force have attended different parts of the country to deal with those terrorist threats, and provided a first-class response to UK policing. And we have to be mindful that our 16 NPOC, what they call national responsibilities, out in Florida at the moment to be disaster victim identification, and we have to ensure that our staff are trained to deal with that, and we're well on that road. Fifth, enhance our digital capability. 3 key areas: communication with the public. Just give an example, firearms licensing. Do we want every interaction to be over the phone or in person? Probably not. You'd probably like people who present a low risk to be able to interact with our website and pay for firearms licensing and go on about their daily business, whether that be social or employment. Interaction with criminal justice agencies to make the issues in relation to attendance at court and sentencing much quicker, which relates to victim care, and also digital investigation and digital media investigators, a key part of our plan moving forward. And lastly, to improve partnership working, collaboration, a key aspect of us moving forward, not just police to police. I think health have got an important part to play with that. Local authority have got an important part to play with that. And of course, more and more into the future, the voluntary sector. I'm constantly shocked really by the amount of skills people who volunteer to assist with our organisation have. Every day something comes across my desk, whether someone's helped in relation to special constabulary, volunteer with us or another organisation, where they made a positive impact on people's lives. So I think that's a key part for collaboration. And again, the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, I think, gives us a real opportunity with public service boards to move forward with a statutory duty placed upon us to link together. I believe that's happening. I attend them all, the Commissioner attends them all, and representatives from the force and the Commissioner's office also attend. And I think it's really important that we establish ourselves in those meetings and build community safety into those wellbeing plans, which I believe is happening. That's my vision, which, as you can probably see, directly links into the Commissioner's Police and Crime Plan. I can speak, Mr. Guy, if you want to, about the investment plan, quite happy to. I'll go on about 5 minutes. I'll be very short if you want to, or if you want to ask questions, please do now. Matter for yourselves.
Well, could I just ask you one question? It's a bit of an understatement to say that you've got a demanding role. So as the Police Commissioner, is there any time when your roles, there can be, there can be a bit of a discussion which area it covers?
Yes, I think there has to be really, and if you look at every part of that role, if you look at a state, it's a key aspect. Me and the Commissioner speak regularly about that. If you look at if I take the example this morning now of what's happening in London, I would see naturally the Commissioner and his public engagement role would want to know what's going on. I would see myself as having an operational deployment role as to what officers and colleagues in the force are going to do. And in relation to, I'm just thinking forward as to what we will be putting in place today now. Community cohesion, relationships already embedded. We'll be speaking to people in the community, young and of certain groups, to reassure them. We'll be ensuring that people in the emergency services and the public are protected and they get the correct information. And I think that crosses both our roles. I feel the Commissioner holds me to account regularly on a weekly basis, and I think we discuss issues there and then. But I think a pragmatic relationship that we have is very, very positive. And I think those roles of holding me to account and operational primacy with myself are always blurred, and they always will be, I think, personally.
If I could just add and endorse those points. Yes, of course, formally, it is my job on behalf of the citizens of Gwent to hold the Chief Constable to account for the delivery of the Policing and Crime Plan. You won't need me to say really that doesn't mean I stand over him with a tick box checking things off, but we certainly do measure performance, and the report that you have later on in the agenda is the beginning of that, mapping police responsibilities and duties to the plan. Often, in terms of partnership working, I often use the issue of the police estate. The estate is part of my portfolio. In theory, subject to resources, of course, I could open police stations in every village in Gwent, but only the Chief Constable can staff them. So obviously, there has to be a partnership approach in terms of the needs of communities and operational needs balanced against resources. So it's quite right, we have a pragmatic approach. We work well together, in my view. We meet at least weekly, and there are also formal methods through the performance boards, which are meetings held in public. The next one is next week, where we will go through a standard formal procedure to assess what the police force is doing and see where changes may need to be made. So the relationship is good. There are clear differences in terms of responsibilities, but as with other key partners, teamwork is essential.
Thank you, Chair. Chief Constable, I wonder if you can give us some information. A short while ago, the headlines in the press were the number of police officers in Wales suffering from stress-related conditions, and the highest percentage seemed to be in Gwent. Now, I don't believe everything I read in the press, but can you confirm that those figures were accurate, and what are you going to do to bring them down?
Yes, of course, and thanks for that question, because as I alluded to earlier, that one of the key parts of my role are to deal with that issue, and it's the motivation, welfare, morale of staff, because if they don't feel motivated, don't feel valued, they won't perform at their best, and I think it's a key role. We weren't the highest. I won't say it was the highest. We were the second highest in the country, which isn't much to brag about, I've got to say. And I think it's a quite complicated picture. I think it's number one, it's the issues people have to deal with. I think people join policing because it's well documented you never deal with the same thing every day, and you deal with challenging issues, and some of them, when you're able to resolve them, are very, very rewarding indeed. But it ever more so, really, it appears you can't get to a resolution because the issues you deal with are really, really complex, whether that be looked after children, whether that be domestic abuse, whether that be human trafficking or child sexual exploitation, because there is no resolution at the end, other than for a very, very long-term resolution. So I think that the nature of policing has changed. And if I mention cybercrime as well, rather than in the more complex traditional crimes, for example, of a dwelling house burglary, which are very complex in the forensic aspects, you could hopefully go to one part of your force area and arrest someone. It's very difficult in cyber-related activities to tell a victim that you're not going to get a resolution because that person could be in Russia or somewhere else. So it's difficult. So those challenges our officers face every day. Secondly, there is a reduction in the number of officers, and I mentioned staff as well. It's a reduction. The workload certainly hasn't reduced and has changed. So that does impact on people. It's natural. And people take time to evolve with that. And I think as a service, we're more tuned now to the fact that we have to look after our people. It goes without saying they're a most important part of the organisation. People internally make their colleagues feel valued, they make the public feel valued, and they make the partners feel valued. And we've had to change our training subtly to be able to do that. Our supervisors now are trained in a particular way that they're able to influence collaboratively, because they know, and I mentioned missing children, for example, they can't just resolve that issue themselves. It's to do with parenting, social services, local authority, health. So we're training them in relation to that. And we've got a significant investment now into mental health training internally. I think we're one of the only forces in the country that has an inspector who's dedicated to mental health. And the training we've got from the investment plan links into first aid training, and that is simply being able to identify if someone is being challenged by mental health on that day or there are issues, and also trauma resilience training, so you can deal with that right at source. So it is a key part of my objective, really, is to make that much, much better. We have got a huge reduction in the amount of attendance figures that we had. We've come down dramatically because we dealt with some of the long-term sickness issues and short-term sickness issues. We've dealt with that dramatically over the last 12 to 18 months. And the figures that appeared in the media don't really demonstrate that. Although, yes, it is key, we were right up there with the other forces. I don't think we're different to other forces in the country in the way we deal with those matters, but I'd like to think we've got an outstanding health and well-being plan which will support those officers and staff moving forward. And again, it's about identifying different ways to deal with things. We've got a pilot launched within Torfaen, which is called Earned Autonomy. And what it's about is giving police officers, and there's police officers in this respect, a bit more responsibility rather than everything being checked and balanced. So it actually releases sergeants to do a bit of supervising rather than sitting down looking at the IT and just ticking the box. And I can guarantee you some things will go wrong. Some things will be missed. But I would hope the positives it brings in that it gives the officers a bit more responsibility and self-esteem, allows the sergeants to manage appropriately as to the job they applied for. The benefits will outweigh the negatives. It's a key part of what we're trying to do in the organisation is manage that anxiety, manage our health, those health issues moving forward. So we've got a motivated workforce, but it's consistently a challenge. But what I'd like to say as well is, and I'd finish on this, yes, those figures may say that. I've been in Gwent 3.5 years. I think we've got a tremendous group of people working in Gwent, police officers and staff. And we've recently had a staff survey feedback, and it said in the country, I think we've got one of the highest public service motivation factors amongst our officers and staff. That is, they want to work for the public. They want to do a good job. If they're well supported, they will do. And I'm more impressed. There was a gentleman from Durham University, and why we've gone with that staff survey is we're allowed to compare across other forces across the country. It shows us as doing very well in relation to that. And what pleases me in relation to the earned autonomy, our supervisors are supervising properly, and they care about the public and care about police work. I think that's really important, and I was delighted when I received that. It's not perfect, but I was delighted. I hope that answers your question. I was very long in answering that, I'm sorry, but I hope it does.
It does, and thank you very much for your explanation.
Thank you.
I knew I was right in not believing what was in the press.
Right, it's going back, an old question I brought up here last year, I think it was, regarding the precept. Now, I asked at the time, the precept, it was said we were going to raise the precept to bring in, that money was going to be then spent on new officers. I want assurances that that money has been spent on the new officers. But I also asked the question as well, which it was recorded the same as this says, regarding whether those new officers will be on top of replacing the ones regarding natural wastage. It was. And I know the Crime Commissioner, did state at the time, yes, it would be. So I want some assurances regarding that of, is it, has the money been, the precept been spent on the new officers, and is it on top of natural wastage as well, where the officers have finished or done their 30-year service? That's another thing. And regarding mental health, there's something that's, you know, when you're talking with officers and different things like that, and I was talking to some regarding collaboration with Merthyr Safe, you know, officers up our end in Blaen y Gwent, instead of them having the long old drive, which I know they hate, and hanging around down Newport to put them into custody, of going to Merthyr instead. But the problem is we've got such high standards with the mental health we have, that's what is causing a few problems with taking any of our ones that need to be detained to Merthyr instead. But then at the if we could work something out with them, that'd be brilliant, because it'd be, one, saving resources as well by them going to Merthyr instead of all the way down to Newport, and two, freeing up officer time as well, because sometimes it can take a whole shift for them just to sort out one prisoner, whereas 10 minutes down the road to another station. So that also will help with morale, because, you know, speaking with officers, the chore all the way down to Newport, there's things like that that's affecting morale as well.
Can I start just on the issue of the precept? If Darren Garwood was here, and as you know, he can't be, he's recovering from an operation, he would immediately point out that the 3.99%, which applies to this financial year, essentially enabled us to flatline with the cut from central government. However, there has been, and built into it, yes, recruitment, which the Chief can talk about in terms of numbers rather than me, because it is an operational decision. In terms of future discussions about the precept, which I will have to have with you, of course, we're in the difficult position at the moment of not knowing what the grant is going to be from central government. So quite how we go forward is not completely clear yet. But it will be, I trust, before much longer, and those discussions on future precept will be held soon. Anyway.
Yes, I can answer that. I don't know if we could bring the slide up on the how it gets onto the screen there, because there we are, that's the slide. I appreciate the figures on the left, the table will be a bit small. I apologise for that. Yeah, they will be, I think. I was thinking, I can barely see them here now. But I'll tell you the figures because I know them, I know them. In the table on the left, it gives dates from 24th of July this year up until 1st of September 18. That is 230 police officers. That is new probationer recruits. If we average on about 50 retirees a year, so and that's going forward. So by the 31st of March 2017, we'll be bringing 184 police officers into. So that's an extra, probably about 134, what you're talking. I've been in conversations with the Commissioner. We have to probably over-plan in relation to police officer numbers at the moment because of the police apprenticeship scheme. We're going to get to a position in 2019-2020 where people may, within the South Wales region, go to a university or 2 or 3 universities. And they won't be able to start straight away. They'll be joining in September. They won't be deployable for 9 months. So we will have a real gap in recruitment. So we have to go over-established with numbers. We were in a position last year in, I think, April, where we had 1,194. By the end of this year, we'd hope to be at 1,300, which is over-established. That's built into the investment plan, and I can tell you where some of those officers will be going, and I think you've had the document before. We'll be putting 9 people into cybercrime, key threat area, 1 detective chief inspector who's already there in relation to public protection, 4 members of police staff in that area, and 10 police constables, detective constables in that area as well. 20 police officers into local operational policing who can be diverted to a number of the areas to assist with problems on a dynamic basis, but that'll also linked into neighbourhood policing. The total cost of that amount of officers and staff is approximately 2.9 million, and that's a big part of the investment plan. Of course, what comes with that is a greater HR process, something I was probably naive to until we started recruiting these people, and a greater training structure behind that, because you won't be able to get this amount of officers in without that. Gwent has not seen anything like it in recent times, and I think it's really positive. And I'd welcome anyone to come to Vantage Point and see the training structures you have. It's really energised over there. We've got people at different ages, different backgrounds coming in, wanting the police. The majority of people are from Gwent or from the surrounding areas, understand the culture, understand the area. It's really, really good. And also below the table, you can see that's in bigger letters, thank goodness, is 57 transferee applications. We run a transferee process. I spoke to the Commissioner a couple of months ago, really. I was keen to run a transferee process. There's a lot of people who want to come to Gwent who didn't have the opportunity because we had the recruitment freeze. And we've had 57 applications within the region. I think that's fantastic. Not every one of those will get in because they won't be the quality that we want, because we have got high qualities. But speaking personally to the inspectors and chief inspectors who are running the interview process, some real quality there. And they'll be able to hit the ground running, whether it's in Blaenau Gwent, whether it's in Caerphilly, whether it's in Newport, whether it's in Torfaen, and whether it's in Monmouth, anywhere. They'll really be able to hit the ground running and bring a lot of experience and different experience to the force, which I think is really, really good. And the second part of the question, so it was about the custody. Right, yes, I could talk about custody. Yes, sorry, I could talk about custody. And again, when I came to the force 3.5 years ago, huge part of the custody process was down to me. And I don't know if you remember, part of my response in the confirmation hearing was the difficult decisions I had to make in relation to custody. And having been a custody officer myself in about 4 or 5 stations, admittedly a long time ago, and I wouldn't be naive enough to say, I could go in there now and do that job. It's a very difficult job. We had a number of difficult decisions to make with custody. The cell structure, I think, throughout Gwent was Ostramanach, Newport, probably about 59, 60 cells. Probably running about 25 prisoners a day. It's just a total waste of money to have the amount of people that. And are the stations in the perfect place? Possibly not. And we've linked in with Meath. I've had collaborative discussions myself over about 6 to 9 months last year, because I think the northern part of the force, I think probably what I would say, Blaenau Gwent, Rumney and Bargoed, could probably do much better in going to Merthyr. And Merthyr is it's a large custody unit. Newport is just as good at it now, although an older, infrastructure, but just as good at it in relation to the processes and policies we have in place. But we haven't come to an agreement, us and South Wales, on that at the moment. If we need to take 1 or 2 prisoners over, that can happen, and the same happens. But we haven't come to an agreement. I know South Wales, such as ourselves, were having reorganisations internally, and that was part of the staffing structure. But I don't think it's forgotten forever. I'm regularly in Blaenau Gwent. I value the opinions of the people up there. I speak to Amanda Thomas regularly. We had a chief officer meeting in Blaenau Gwent last week. Amanda, Matt, who's the community sergeant, tremendous, and also Gareth Jenkins, who's hopefully will be one of our fast track officers in the future. I spoke to me about custody and spoke to all of us. It was definitely not lost on us, and it is something that we're constantly evaluating going forward. They have got the longest drive, and I reassure them we're constantly looking at it, and I try to get, it's not always easy to do this. For example, in Dyfed-Powys they'll have a longer drive. In Gloucester they'll have a longer drive. In Devon and Cornwall it's 3 times as long, and that doesn't help us always. And what the most pleasing thing is, on the majority of occasions, the people we do bring down to Newport aren't extremely violent, which is a concern, and then they can go to Merthyr. But it's definitely something that'll constantly be on my agenda, and something we look to resolve in the future. But it's a point well made, I think.
I think, thank you very much for answering the question in such detail. I think now we can move on, really. And we now move on to the we're talking about number 6, Gwent Police Performance Monitoring. And that's pages, no, that's just, there's no pages to give you the...
Yes, thank you. I trust you've had the written report now. Okay. This will be, I'll just introduce it, and then this will be an act for, well, all of us upon here in terms of answering any questions that there may be. This is really, it's work in progress, this report. What's in here is good stuff. Not entirely happy with the linkages yet that we're making to outcomes mapped against the priorities within the plan, but I think that we're getting there. But there is more work for us to do in presenting meaningful information to you in terms of monitoring the force performance. And on this, if I could invite you, Chair, to consider whether a small subgroup of perhaps 2 or 3 members of this panel could be determined upon to work with us, with my office and the Chief, indeed, in terms of presenting this information to you in the best way that's possible. If you want to have a discussion about that, and then to see if you would like to work with my office in terms of whether we can present things in a clearer way. Nevertheless, you've got the report before you. I don't intend to go through the items. Both the Chief and I will do our best to answer any questions that you may have on the performance report as it's written now.
Can I say that, the recommendation you've given there to us to consider, probably it would be good if we had 3 members and then we sort of consultation by email or something like that, which would be a lot quicker than, sort of can drag on a bit, can it really? So I think that would be a good idea, really.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's entirely up to yourselves, but I think we would certainly value the input of the readers of this report, if you like, once you've had a chance to reflect on it. And I do appreciate that roughly half of the membership now is new. so that we can produce documents that are meaningful and helpful and accurate.
Chair, just a comment to say, back a few years ago, previous to your tenure, Jeff, we had a Home Office training day we did down in Cardiff, and all the panels from Wales actually met down in Cardiff, and I found it was very productive. It was all of us sat together because we were discussing different issues that we all had, and it was very, very positive. My biggest concern is financially, if we've got to pay into the service, for this service, we've already got problems with the budget. Talk about that next, is that right? No worries on that bit. But the other point, the main point is, it was very positive, all of us together. I know it was training with the Home Office, but it was really positive, all of us being together.
Look, thanks for that. I know that the next item is indeed a matter for yourselves in terms of a national association. However, regardless of the outcome of that discussion, this is certainly a matter I can bring up with the All Wales Policing Group about whether they might like to host and organise a meeting for the 4 panels in Wales to deal with this. Very happy to raise that. And what we can report on is that we've had some very good linkages in with Home Office, the Welsh-based Home Office staff, who are very keen to work with us further. So I just put that in as information. Yeah.
Just to add to that we've had some constructive discussions with the Welsh Local Government Association, who also want to support the development and the panels across Wales in terms of how we take that forward. And in fact, we discussed that at our executive board this week, and there's an action for us to follow that up with the WLGA.
Could we have 3 people to... would you be interested? Yep.
Anybody else?
Anyone else?
Jill as well. Jill and Peter.
Yeah. I'm quite happy if nobody else.
Yeah.
Okay, there's 3 of us. Okay, so we've covered that. Yes, go on.
Right, thank you. I got 2 questions on your report. One is the overview of crime within Gwent, and if you'd rolled the essentials of crime in Gwent together, it would have shown a reduction. But obviously, with East and West, you were showing an increase, a slight increase, as you put it, in the Monmouthshire side. It concerns me that I know you got lots of pressures that Newport have. Newport sucks in a lot of your resources, and this is a similar thing we saw with the ambulance service. The resources sucked into the big city. Are you able to overcome this matter of the rurality bit, which you referred to in the last meeting we had, that it is a difficult area to police because it's a big area and you can't have police everywhere? That's the one question. The other question is regarding the not the custody suite, the communication suite. I think you might answer. You're showing a 30% drop in, or 30% numbers of abandoned calls. 30,000 altogether, and which 10,000 are abandoned. Have you got? There must be a way of identifying whether you do get recalls or redials, which would then add up to less than 30% drop. In other words, of the 10,000 were dropped, how many were redialed, which came back into the total? In other words, are the statistics not incorrect, but are the statistics easily to read, or easier to read if there was another way of presenting them? So that's the 2 questions. Thank you.
I wonder if I could look. The item 8 is the report on the communication suite. I wonder if we could defer that question until that point. I'll ask, in terms of your first question, I will ask the Chief to comment on the allocation of personnel to the different parts. Just for your information, I know it says the opening sentence, all crime has reduced, but is still above the average. The average is roughly 120 crimes reported each day. So there is a balance. The numbers are not dramatic in terms of the rise in the east. And I take your point. There is a focus on central Newport at the moment, which the Chief will confirm, and we understand the reasons why. But anyway, Chief.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, if I look at demand pressures across Gwent, just to give you all an idea of where we are, Torfaen would be the busiest. There's no doubt about it, Torfaen. and that is from Cwmbran, Lower Cwmbran, right up to Blaenavon, sort of areas, really. Then you've got Newport East, Newport West, always a busy place. Maindy, Coast Pill, you know, there's no secret there. So those sort of areas. Blaen y Gwent would probably be there as well. Then the various areas of Caerphilly, and then of course, as you know, South Monmouth would be probably established that in relation to the number of crimes and the number of incidents produce the less demand for us. Although that then, and any police force will experience this, that brings with it different challenges. Firstly, the expectations of the people there. When you have one incident, they won't perceive a lot of demand across the whole force, so they will rightly expect immediate attention of that incident, whereas the perception of people in other areas may not be so demanding because they may experience, unfortunately, those issues on a day-to-day basis or on a week-to-week basis. There are decisions to be made on police officer and police staff deployment, and I tend to put the resources in the busier areas. On occasions, a significant amount of resource can end up in Newport, but I'd say on occasions they can end up in Torfaen. I think with the amount of warrants we've done in Monmouth of late, and that's due to the community officers. Matt Hollins, for example, very, very proactive. We bring resources up to assist him as a community officer, so they are deployable anywhere in the county. A significant part of demand, I would suggest, can be dealt with by communication, and we're very much aware of the issues you have in Monmouth North and Monmouth South, because I'm in regular communication with Arwyl Hicks and, of course, Phil Morris. But yet there are decisions on deployability of officers, and a conscious decision is often to put them in the busiest areas. I don't know if that answers your question. Probably not something you'd want to hear, but that is a practical matter. The officers and staff will go to those areas, but it has to be remembered as well. If something happens, for example, in a particular area, we can move all the officers from the force to that area for a particular period of time. We can mobilise regional resources, and I think we've become much better at doing that over the years, because 7 days a week we have possibly up to 3 senior managers in the force, 4 including our force control room, who actually consider deployment issues and how to deploy in relation to sensitivity of community needs.
You sort of answered the question, you sort of satisfy me, but not totally, in as much as what we see it on the press across the whole of Wales and England. Rural crime is expensive crime. Farmers' equipment being stolen into hundreds of £1,000s worth of equipment. So really, do your statistics mask the fact that some of these crimes are quite very serious crimes? Would you have those sort of levels of crime within Torfaen and Blaen y Gwent, or would they be, how do you balance the two?
It's very, very difficult, because you could have a significant number of violent crime, which could be lower level of crime in a certain area, such as public order, which we're duty bound to record now over ethical crime recording standards. And it goes without saying, you could have one incident in a particular area has got nowhere near that level of crime and impact upon that person, that community, that family for a huge period of time, and can be more impactful. It is a difficult balancing act, and we do rely on the quality of our officers to be able to deal with that. Obviously, we've got Farm Watch in the more rural communities, and I think the inspectors and the staff are picked and selected to go to those areas because they're very sensitive of those issues. Yeah, we manage demand on not only, and I apologise if I made that comment and it was a bit misleading, not only on the number of crimes, but the impact on the victim, the level and quality of that crime, if that's the right statement. So there is a balancing act to be made. But I'm confident when we have those issues, because as you know yourself, unfortunately, what you'd probably get in Monmouth more than anywhere else is what we call travelling criminals. Come in from other parts of England who could, quite easily come into the area. And because of the opportunities they have, and because of possible affluence in the area, people will be targeted. And that is something we look at on a very visible basis. But again, it's not something I can really talk about, but it's on a covert basis as well, because it's not only the local policing structure. We've got covert opportunities within Gwent. We've got covert opportunities across the region. And I can assure you we get our fair share of those resources, and probably over and above what we put into them, which is really, really good. And that's because of some of the superintendents that we have working in Gwent really pushing to get those resources up to us. So I'm acutely aware of the issues of rural crime and the issues that causes on the community, and we're very, very, very conscious of the impact that has.
Bill, I think you want to follow up on that.
Thank you, Chief Constable. Where do you begin with this? We understand that priorities move, and that every day we face different priorities. And speaking about Pure Gwentley, you seem to be making progress there and getting the situation that went out of control back under some kind of control there, because the vast majority of people there are law-abiding people. However, to get them back under civil obedience, then, if you want to call it that, it's taken away resources from the semi-rural and the rural areas, because they are perceived to be less likely to need policing. Newport East is made up of a vast amount of different areas. It can be almost in a city to estates to semi-rural to rural areas. However, the perception is that those living in the semi-rural areas are feeling unpoliced. The perception is that one guy told me, and we look to social media these days as well to get our free feedback as members. And one chap said, if it wasn't for the invisible policing, you wouldn't have any. My response to that is, I suppose, if we don't see you, that means that things are okay. I mean, it's all about perceptions. However, these type of situations cannot be tolerated. We just can't keep moving people around because it's disruptive to the progress of the prevention of crime in all our areas. Yes, Gwentley needed the concentration it did, but now the rural areas, Langstone, Mago, Beechwood, Bettis, all these areas, Liswerry, they all need high-level policing because crime has changed. And I notice from some surveys, people say they feel safe. From other surveys, people say they don't feel safe. Sometimes I think it's a matter of age, whether you feel safe or not. But however, we need to ensure, Commissioner, that we have enough police bodies and that we deliver the protection that the people of Gwent deserve. Merely moving bobbies across from A to B and the reaction times that we have in that, right, is not sustainable going forward. We do support the police. We know the difficulties that they face. We have very good policing right throughout with regards to the individual dedication. But we as a police and crime panel need to assist them by getting, as you said, recruitment. but we need to assist by having the feel-good factor throughout our independent wards.
Could I answer some of that point, or at least respond to some of it? And I'm sure the Chief will want to come in on some of the other points you mentioned. You are quite right. There is considerable work that's been done in Pill and the rest of central Newport, and that is producing benefits. What I want to stress is that the police have made their contribution, but it's very much a partnership issue. And it's something that the Newport Public Service Board is taking very seriously and receives regular reports on. And the partnership and cooperation that the police have with the local authority, with fire and rescue, with the registered social landlords, Newport City Homes, is first class. And it's really a combined effort that has produced the benefits that we can now see in Pill. And most Pill residents, you're absolutely right, overwhelmingly are law-abiding, and they just want to be able to live peacefully and in a respectful community. And many of those now will agree that things are improving. There's still a way to go, but it'll be a partnership matter. In terms, can I say, I am aware of some of the concerns from the more rural parts of Newport East and indeed Monmouthshire. I had a discussion week before last. Councillor Frances Taylor, who used to be a member of this committee, she came in to see me together with a local resident to talk about Magor and Undy in particular and some of the concerns that they have there. And as a result of that discussion, I've had a chat with the Chief, who's going to now look into this matter to see what the situation is and what the implications are for actual crime and resources. So we are alert to, and certainly from this, my office, to the policing and well-being of the whole of Gwent. And of course, look, I agree. We do want more police officers. We are making strides within our resources to try and achieve that, as we outlined earlier. Ultimately, of course, it comes down to money to be able to hire and train new police officers. We're not quite sure where we are there. It's something that I won't shy away from if it comes down to precept funding. But, you know, those are discussions that I would have to have with a lot of people first so that we know exactly what deals we can get. But those are things that I'm prepared to do if I have to. I'll leave it there, and perhaps the Chief.
As was mentioned earlier, it's a point well made, of course. We want to police all areas. And it's not just the level of demand numbers wise, but it's the quality of service we provide as well. You're well aware of the issues we had within Pill and the operation to counter that, which I think has been successful, to parade 250, 300 officers on one day or 2 days within Gwent, unheard of. And it's really made a big impact, which allows us a template moving forward. I think the inspectors we've got in those areas of Newport, the 3 areas are very, very good. I know they link in with yourselves as well. And part of their role is to ensure that everyone feels valued. As the Commissioner said, totally understand the perception out there. And it is on occasions, if people don't have interaction with the police, it's a positive thing because some things may not be happening. And unfortunately, I think the fear of crime is caused by so many things. It's not just what's going on in Newport. Look what's happening in London. I'll certainly be thinking things because of what's going on in London this morning. I'm a Chief Constable, so I assume every one of you will be thinking about travel, future, families. It's natural. That impacts on the fear of crime. And, huge amount of media issues will. If we were to roll back 15 years, we wouldn't have the immediacy of the media and social media, etc. But that's a positive and a negative as well in some areas. But I can assure you, I'm very, very much aware of what's going on in the rural areas. I would hope in the future they do get a quality level of policing, and that's from police officers and PCSOs and police staff and volunteers as well, because that structure comes into play. There's a continuity of staff required in certain areas in relation to sort of inspector ranks as well. But sometimes with these individuals. You've got to allow them to develop and move on, because that's what motivates them, and that's really positive. And I think it's a real strength we've got in Gwent, because fortunately the size of the area, we can move people about sometimes. You know, you don't want to do it all the time because it just doesn't work, but with our area support units, they're multifunctional, they can move around and they adapt and they develop. But please, your point is well made, and I will feed that back and take that myself for the future.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So really to talk now about this report and on what the OPCC is doing in terms of the performance of the report. We talked in quite some detail back in January when you brought the plan about how we were going to look to take this forward and how we were going to monitor this. They're self-set objectives. So in determining that, I would have expected at that time you were considering at that point, in 4 years' time, how am I going to demonstrate I've achieved these? And the invitation to create a small subgroup is appreciated. Happy to be part of that. But my point really is that it's not about you evidencing to us just as a group. We can work with you. It's not evidence to us as the panel. Yes, we have a role in order to say, are you performing? Are you holding the Chief Constable to account? But it's also about you demonstrating to the public. And I think my concern with the report as it stands at the moment is that you're not evidencing to the panel that a year down the road, actually, we're taking any of this forward in some cases. So if you can't evidence to us, then we can't support you to evidence to the public either. So when we talked about it before, we were talking about the 2017 to 2021 plan, and you were saying that the approach is to move from targets and look at the direction of travel. Completely understand that. It's looking backwards a little bit, looking forwards, looking at the resources, how are we going to move forward? But this report is fundamentally missing then the baselines from which we are going to move. So you've been in position now since May 16, so there needs to be some baseline as of May 16 to say, okay, that was the first year, that was the previous year of the previous incumbent, how are we now moving forward? How are we illustrating the direction of travel? We also talked about where the data didn't exist, and in some cases it might well not exist because it's a new objective. What then is going to be the methodology for capturing that? Sometimes information cannot be captured over a 6-month period, and it needs to develop to be able to show a direction of travel. So my concern with this report was that you've set your own objectives, and at the moment there is no baseline for us to monitor and for you to take forward. So when really can the panel be expected to sort of see some of those baselines and the methodology, given the frustrating thing is some of this exists. You've used some of it in the annual report. You've talked about it in other places. So we're not expecting you to go away and create lots of new data. That's not what this is about. It's using what you've got, evidence in moving forward, but where there are gaps then saying, how are we going to plug that gap? How are we going to move forward? So that's my first question, please.
Look, thank you very much. And that is exactly what we want to happen. Technically, up until May of this year, we were at the final year of my predecessor's plan. We've now got the new plan in place since May, and it is that we're keen to focus on. And we want to get it right as quickly as possible. And I don't dispute the points that you've made and about the work that needs to be done, which is why I began in the way that I did, because we recognise that there are some shortfalls. They're all achievable. I'm quite convinced with that. One of the reasons why we thought it'd be a good idea to involve the panel is that we then have that expert inside view, if you like, about how things are being presented, because you're quite right. I want interested members of the public before much longer to be able to access information that's simple to understand, that's relevant and is accurate, so that they can say and see how we are or are not meeting the objectives and the priorities from within the plan. And that is my determination. It's one reason why Neil Taylor, the head of performance here from my office, is attending this discussion. So that we can feed it in, and let me assure you, I want to get this right, and my whole team wants to get this right, and that's why it'll be given priority.
Okay, but I think it is key that that information exists, you need to be presenting it. Otherwise, it's no good us being sat here in 2019 saying, okay, we looked at 2018 and there's been a little bit of improvement, because actually the improvement could have been better. And, we need to be focusing on where those strengths are. But that should already be in place, I think. And that's what I would like to be fed back. The report in the overview then talks about crime reducing but being above average. Is that a positive statement? I don't know. Is it good to be above average? I don't know. Are there influential factors in terms of the areas we're in terms of particular crime? We've talked about cybercrime increasing. So is being above average acceptable? In some areas it might be, in some it might not. It then talks about how June crime has dropped and then looks to focus on ASB. That's talking about a little bit of detail. We should be looking strategically at crime to be able to say, what are you doing about these particular areas? But then in something else, you talk about crimes reported to the end of March haven't actually increased by over 9% on the previous year. So in one document, we're saying crime's increasing. And in this report, we're talking about a very small period that says it's actually reducing. So we need to be very clear about the messages we're putting out there. And if it is increasing, we say it's increasing and look at the factors as to why and what we're doing about it. So my frustration with this really is that the panel not actually to ascertain what are Gwent Police's figures. What are the figures as a whole, and what are the categories? So if you look at the CEC, the crime statistics for England and Wales, they have very specific categories and very specific figures. I think we need something that's as clear and as simple as that, to be able to look at what are the categories and what are the factors, not necessarily drilling down into last month compared to this month, because that's not what, as a panel, I think we want to be holding you to account. If I was to say to you, why has July increased on June? Is that really where you should be? No. We want to be looking at, is ASB improving generally? Not was it higher in July? Because people are on holidays, people are off drinking, and crime goes up as a result of that. We need to be looking broader than that, I would suggest. We can't see why ASB needs to be focused on. Is ASB the highest category of crime? And we're not clear about really the period that's been examined. So I think going forward, something that's broader, over more categories, I think, and that's something that we can work with you on, but it'll also help illustrate to the public why we're looking at certain areas.
Thank you. The points are very, very well made. It's one of the reasons why I welcome this discussion and the commitment to work with us, hopefully over a short period, so that we can achieve what you want us to achieve in terms of the presentation of information. However, in terms of the particular points that you mentioned about crime rate, ASB, I can ask the Chief to comment on what they are now.
Yes, and all fair questions, I think, and of course we can give you that data. That data's there and it can be presented in any format, whether on a monthly, 6 months or yearly basis. Totally agree, it should be over a year really, or at least 6 months. In relation to the figures themselves, go back to June, 9% crime increase, which is standard across the country. Areas for Gwent will be violent crime, public order, probably about 18%, I would think. Rise on last year up to 41,000 crimes. Get about 120 a day, although that does drop down, because 120 a day would take us to 43,000, we're not there. And a rise last year was shoplifting 30%. Now, I can give my views on a lot of that, and it won't all be right. And I think we're in that position across the country as well. In relation to public order, and I impress upon everyone as well, is it's violent crime, but violence without injury. So you're talking of a category, you have violence with injury, which is Section 18, Section 20, GBH, the serious, one with intent, one without intent. The other violent crime is common assault, actual bodily harm. So the violence without injury is common assault, etc. Public order is your Section 5, Section 4, down to a fray, which is your shouting, arguing, pushing, and a fight as well. And those are the levels of crimes which have risen by about 18%. My reasoning behind that is probably 2-3 years ago, if a third party would have rung in for example, CCTV or someone else would have rung in, there's a fight in Newport Town Centre, there's a fight in Blaenau Gwent, you just wouldn't have recorded those. You would not have recorded them. There's no chance of detecting them. You're never going to speak to the people. And, of course, there's no complaint. So you wouldn't have recorded those. You'd record them now. As soon as that comes into the control room, you'd record them, you'd put them on the system, and that has made our figures rise. Is Gwent more violent than it ever was? I would say not. I would say not, to be honest with you. I say, what's the correct terminology to use? It's called National Crime Recording Standards, which is linked to ethical crime recording, which says we record everything that is reported to us, whether it's detected, etc., or will be investigated. And that's what violent crime is impacted upon. In relation to those figures as well, in the violent crime categories, violence without injuries, and an area called miscellaneous offences, you have areas of harassment, you have areas of social media bullying. Their areas come into the new areas of criminality, which we do record now, and a few years ago we would not have recorded them because probably we weren't really used to them. So we are recording a lot more. In relation to shoplifting, again, a number of reasons, possibly austerity. People are shoplifting more than before. We're getting called more than before, possibly. There's a number of systems we've had in place before with the big stores where they haven't called us for issues of less than £10, for example, because they're not putting the protective measures in place anymore, or because they're not being proactive. That's not everyone. So there's a number of reasons for that. So in relation to those strategic figures, which I totally agree, which is what you need to know about, Gwent has risen by 9%. Crime, which is steady with the rest of the country. It's down to ethical crime recording. It's down to greater scrutiny on that, because what I want to know about is if crime is rising, for example, up by 9%, and our national crime recording standards are at 60%, there's obviously something wrong, because you probably get another 5,000 out of that. But if our crime recording standards are around 90-odd%, because it is difficult to establish some crimes sometimes, I'd be more satisfied. I think going forward this year, and we can get those figures, areas we're concentrating on are the new areas of criminality, but we have to consistently concentrate on vehicle crime. In Monmouth, for example, thefts of vehicles, thefts from vehicles, burglary dwellings, we cannot move away from that. And antisocial behaviour, the reason why we consistently target antisocial behaviour is because during your voice campaigns, during the commissioners' meetings, during inspectors' meetings, due to PCSO's meetings, fortunately, people will not always talk about serious crime issues, but will talk about antisocial behaviour. So it is a key element of what we do. And I really do believe that antisocial behaviour in areas such as PIL will lead into getting away with issues, will then lead into serious and organised crime, will link into lower level organised crime groups, will deal drugs, take money and move into organised crime. So genuinely, totally can see where you're coming from, the data. We can present that because we hold the figures for the Commissioner in whatever format is required to allow scrutiny.
Can I just jump in on there? These are all the crimes that are reported to you, because everybody knows that a lot of crime is not reported to the police. In fact, the Commissioner's Office probably has more of a handle on that, because people speak to you about, oh well, this happened, that happened, and your question, did you report it to the police? No, didn't bother. Is there any way that we can collect that information so that we can see, because it affects your figures, and I know people speak to me in the street about, and the first question I ask, did you report it to the police? And 9 times out of 10, no, they didn't.
Yeah, you're quite right. It's enormously frustrating that when I meet concerned residents who are either coming to my surgery or contacting me by other means, very often the response to the question, has this been reported, especially if there's a complaint about attack of police? Well, no, didn't bother. What's the point? So you're between a rock and a hard place there. Now, I don't keep figures of that. Anecdotally, I'll often go back to the chief and say, I was told this at a surgery, or somebody's, we'll look into the matter. But of course, we always consistently now urge people and organisations that and we had a case in Abertwysog recently where local councillors came to see me, and they had a number of complaints from residents, but they had to admit that this had not been passed on to the police. So they recognised the unfairness of that. So we try to strive to say, look, if you're worried about crime, if you think you see a crime that's happening or could happen, phone the police. If a crime's underway, certainly 999. And we do try to get that message across. It's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to have any accurate measures of crimes that are not reported.
It is a confidence thing, isn't it? It's a confidence in the police. You know.
Chairman, over the summer we've seen a high rise of anti-social behaviour in the ward that I represent, and in my discussions with the local policing officers, the high rise in anti-social behaviour was actually never reported back to them, so they couldn't prioritise their priorities, if that's the right word to use. So we've been getting messages out to people now. You don't have to tolerate antisocial behaviour. You don't have to tolerate. If you feel threatened, then you are threatened, you know. And we're encouraging people to use the 101 telephone service, and we're also encouraging people to email the local officers as well if they see speeding traffic, if they see antisocial behaviour of any kind at all. Because unless the public, and that's why we're mentioning it here now, unless the public help us to help the police, we can't help anybody. And so it is vital that it is reported. Although it's going to put added stress to the force, I think if you can nip this antisocial behaviour in the bud, in the long run, you can resolve a lot of issues.
Well, quite right. People must feel it is a confidence issue. They must feel empowered to inform the police. They won't be publicly identified. But, you know, without the information, it is difficult to deal with it, unless by chance a police officer or a PCSO happens to be there at the time. And your point is well made. What I would stress is that I think local elected representatives have a critical role to play with us in terms of spreading that message. And so I welcome your observation. Ultimately, we often use the expression, the police cannot be responsible for policing alone. It's the responsibility of every citizen in a democracy to make sure that they do report and engage with us. But I know, Chief, you wanted to respond to some of the points.
Yes, just to come back on one thing, a couple of points for me. We often get called where it's not our responsibility, but there's no one there at 3 o'clock in the morning, so we'll attend to it, because generally the people who got working for us have a sense of public duty, and they'll answer the call and they'll go to it, and it's nothing to do with the police, and it raises the demand. And surely, on some instances, we don't want the police to be called, because we don't want to criminalise every young person in Gwent, because when police do attend, and because of the level of accountability they have, they tend to take some sort of formal action. Young people do get criminalised, and they're into a system then which we don't particularly want them in, which is very, very difficult to get out of. So I think it's a balance, and I'm sure yourselves would want to be reassured that with crimes such as burglaries, sexual offences, cybercrime as it develops, and any sort of assaults, you would want them to report it to us immediately, I'm sure with certain areas of antisocial behaviour which do not want police powers, I'm sure you'd want the right agency informed and it to be dealt with on a partnership basis. And I'm sure you'd want us to provide that visibility in areas as well. I don't think the antisocial behaviour recording picture paints the complete picture, because of course people do not report to us everything, and I wouldn't expect that, and that I think will continue in the future. And personally, I don't think it's just a confidence thing. I sometimes don't think that people do want to get involved with the police and go through a long-term process, because developing dispersal orders, public space protection orders, you need people to engage with you, and people do want a quick response on occasions, which isn't always available. But it is recognised. We want people to report issues to us. But again, certainly part of the partnership approach, we don't want to criminalise every young person for doing something that is termed as antisocial behaviour, because that does, in the future, have much greater problems, I believe. But it's a real, difficult balancing act. And I don't think I can give the right answer to that. It's just that I think that our officers and staff are aware of it.
I was not just talking about antisocial behaviour. It was all crime. Only a percentage gets reported to you. And I know, as you mentioned the youth, you have cautions, you have warnings, and then before they slip into court, they go into referral orders. So it's quite a way before they actually come into the youth court.
I was nowhere calling, let's make no mistake about it, I wasn't calling for the criminalisation of every child or every minor or everybody, because it's not just children that or under 18s that create antisocial behaviour. But I wasn't specifically calling for the criminalisation of everybody that you turn up to deal with that. You refer to other agencies. Well, I can tell you, in the Langstone ward, there are no other agencies. There are no other partnership working groups. We have no designated warden service. I mean, they're dedicated to the city centre and to other wards, not Langstone ward. And so we have nowhere else to turn when it is antisocial behaviour. It's a matter of education. I welcome the fact that if there are agencies out there, and I'm not aware of them, I'm quite open with regards to being educated as to who they are. I certainly, as one of the city councillors there, would welcome working with other agencies to see how we could deter the antisocial behaviour. And it's really why I want to deter it, because it's dangerous antisocial behaviour, probably to themselves, as much as other people. But certainly it's about speaking to them first, educating them first. I don't want to see them criminalised. I don't want to see them given a police caution, because given a police caution, you've ruined them for the rest of their lives, as far as I'm concerned these days. And so we've got to move to something else. But my point was, I do ask people to ring 101 or to email when there's antisocial behaviour, so we can monitor and prioritise, not criminalise and demonise. That's what I'm trying to get to.
I found as a councillor, especially over the last 2 years, where the elderly, they're ringing their councillors on police matters rather than going to the police or calling 101 or something like that, because the elderly are afraid of repercussions. They're afraid of if they report something, the people will come back to them and smash their windows and things like that. So, it's... I find that they are turning to us more than they are. But the PCOs in our area, they're very good, because I put them onto the PCOs, and the PCOs go and talk to them, have discussions with them. And I've had a 20-minute conversation with a PCO this morning on a matter that we talked about recently. So I don't know. The elderly are really too scared to ring 101 or get in contact with a police officer.
Unfortunately, with austerity comes cuts and cuts to local authorities, and the first places get it are youth services and play services. We've seen a massive reduction of youth club activities and play services in our area, and obviously we see a rise in antisocial behaviour, because all of a sudden the youth who've had 3, 4, 5 nights a week of places to go no longer have anywhere to go. They're still going to go out, they're still going to start congregating around the shops and creating mischief that people will see as antisocial behaviour. The calls get made to the police are going to respond. It's short-sighted to say the least. To keep youth clubs open costs not a huge amount of money. It probably costs more for the police to respond to the antisocial behaviour calls than it does to keep these clubs open. So there needs to be some partnership working with local authorities and police to reopen these youth clubs that they are closing at the rate of knots, have them open every night so the young people have got somewhere to go and somewhere to socialise, and then we will see the drop in young people antisocial behaviour. Until then, it's going to carry on rising.
If I could just respond, I mean, I understand the points you're making about older people, although I do get a lot of older people coming to see me on a face-to-face basis, I have to say. But I see that as part of the valuable role of local councillors, is to act as the spokesperson for groups of residents, and there's nothing wrong with that as well. But I do understand the issue of a fear of recriminations, and it's sometimes hard to overcome that. You know, I mentioned when I was talking about the new approach to the partnership fund, the issue of youth work. Formerly I was a part-time youth worker in the evenings. And what is happening to youth work, in my view, is very short-sighted. You will actually make more problems for society in general a few years down the line as a result of a lack of investment in youth services. Local authorities have very little choice in terms of austerity. I know that they have to now focus more and more on their core statutory requirements, and often the casualty is the youth provision. We do have, of course, a lot of third sector charitable organisations that are engaged in youth work as well, and we will try to support those. But I take your point very, very much indeed. Certainly through the public service boards, we will argue and agitate for greater partnership working between local authorities, other agencies, including the third sector, with ourselves about youth provision. And that is one of the reasons why, and it's not going to solve the problem, but why the resources I have directly at my disposal that I can use for external things is why I want to focus in the way that I've indicated.
Thanks. Just a couple more questions, some of which I'll just, the others I'll just drop you a note as I've done before. I'll skip to paragraph 6, where we are talking about tackling antisocial behaviour, actually. You're talking about measuring how people are less affected. Is that by reducing the number of incidents, or is it they feel personally less affected by it? So it's the bullet point there. So we've got people being less affected. So is that the number of incidents are reducing, or is it that they feel personally less affected by it?
Yes, a number of points you could bring into that. Obviously, it's more by the qualitative data. We, as you rightly suggest, we collect your voice, rate those services which is on the website, feedback from Gwent now, feedback from the inspector surgeries, feedback from PCSO surgeries, linked to the amount as well. It's not just the quantitative data, it's the qualitative data. I've got to say, it's really difficult to get to the bottom of that when you say less affected, because less affected in what area, and what is the impact? Has it been police impact? Again, has it been partnership impact, or has it been they just haven't contacted the police? So I think it's a variety of factors, but I think to determine that, so you have some sort of accountability mechanism, is all those areas, what's coming out in your voice, what's coming out in communication, what's coming out in the commissioners' communication with the public as well, and the quantitative figures in the area. That's what I think.
Yeah, thank you for that. But obviously, Commissioner, you've made the point there that it's people are less affected and are experiencing fewer. Experiencing fewer is going to be quite easy to demonstrate based on accurate recording, which we've talked about. But I think you need to be very clear about how you're actually going to evidence less affected, because that can be subjective, and you can talk about using your voice, etc. That, you know, they're the methods that are there, but you've undertaken there to demonstrate that people are actually less affected as well.
Well, yes. I mean, I suppose that's the outcome of better reporting, partnership action, is so that we can, and exactly how we measure it, I agree, is difficult in terms of people's perceptions, their feelings. We do have surveys, of course, where we'll ask people, and I dare say we'll have reports back via people like yourselves about their communities as well. But I do take a point. I mean, these are reported incidents. We can show it's falling over the next page from 2016 to 2017. When I saw those two bar charts, I thought, they don't look quite right, so I've measured them. And actually, the 2017, the blue one, should be less than that, because it's reduced, and for the red on 2017 it's actually shown as a larger amount, whereas in fact it's fallen. So I apologise for that, but yeah, the point is well made, and we have said we want to have as a priority outcome that people feel safer, less affected, and we do need to establish a practical means of assessing that.
And that practicality needs to, it should have started, it needs to be starting, because to evidence that trend over the period of time, it's not just about counted numbers if you're talking about feeling less affected as well. Okay. My final question on this then is on sort of para 7. We're talking about efficient and effective service delivery. We're talking about victims being satisfied, but one of the things we've talked about before is that how are the officers that they are, it says here about that a satisfied and professional workforce. We've had points about stress increasing. Now, that isn't necessarily only workplace stress. Stress is quite a broad category, and stress often comes from maybe a separate illness, or it can come from a family situation. So we need to be careful how we're actually categorising and reporting on stress. So information, again, that probably is available. I think you need to be showing here around where is there data around productivity, where is there data around sickness absence that can be used, not to illustrate a problem with the force, but that can be used to illustrate how you're actually, the welfare of your officers is being looked at. You know, training figures, again, when budgets are tight, one of the first things that gets cut is training, but you're in a position where the crime is developing, it's changing, you're referring to the nature of changing of cybercrime, how hate crime is different. So how are we evidencing what training is being undertaken, and this valuable and worthwhile training, not just the people going through, oh, you've got to do bullying and harassment every year like we used to have to do at the Vale. Yes, it's a tick in the box, yes, we've done the same course, it's the same as it was 2 years ago. But how are we using this information to evidence that we're looking after our staff? And how is the OPCC using that information to make sure that the Chief Constable is making sure that they're trained, the wellbeing strategy is being followed, and that staff absence or sickness, because sometimes you can have long-term absence which is unpaid, which isn't linked to sickness because they don't want to be on the sick, and it's using all this now to tease that out. And I think we need to be looking at sickness particularly. And I think it would be helpful if for a future meeting, actually, the OPCC could bring a report, if the panel are in agreement with that, that picks up on the points about stress earlier, looking at what's the stress patterns been, what methodologies are in place, and what are the OPCC doing to look at those figures and make sure that they're being dealt with.
Thank you for that. I know the Chief will undoubtedly want to comment on the management of stress within the police service, and Larry wants to comment on aspects of it. I mean, the particular priority that we'd highlighted here is about victims feeling more satisfied with the service they receive, or satisfied with the service they receive. Much of that is evidenced through direct contact with the officers involved. I know there are often things, well, they'll only say the good thing, or what they perceive to be the good things to the officer, but I don't think that's quite true. Very often, victims, especially if they're coming through the Victims Hub, Connect Gwent, will be quite blunt and truthful with what they feel about things, because they'll have the confidence of whoever it is that they're dealing with. So we can assess that to a degree. However, I know Larry wants to comment further, and then the Chief.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments, Jill. And you know, they are very much taken on board, and we will reflect those aspects in future reports, absolutely. And I think that it is very much work in progress. You know, we're looking forward to working with yourselves in order to ensure that we have and we do report and can report and evidence the progress by Gwent Police to the public and to yourselves. I think one of the challenges is that we've been working very closely with the Chief Constable and his team to ensure that we've got the right monitoring mechanisms at all levels and throughout all aspects of the organisation's performance. So I think traditionally, you know, a lot of performance has been very focused on perhaps crime figures, but actually we're wanting to see that much broader and having a number of conversations on an ongoing basis to ensure that we can demonstrate organisational performance across all aspects of Gwent Police. You'll be pleased to know that the HMIC are actually bringing in new mechanisms for Gwent for police force inspections across England and Wales, which will include something called force management statements, which they will have to be bringing in, and we see that as providing another vehicle to ensure that we've got not only a really robust performance monitoring system for Gwent Police, but that is in keeping with performance management systems across all of the police forces in England and Wales, so that we can compare adequately as well. In relation to the sickness levels and in particular stress levels, I think that there is very good work going on in Gwent Police that we need to be reflecting and reporting on. The new performance system that is being implemented as we speak in Gwent Police includes a new health and wellbeing board, which will look in detail at the critical areas that you're referring to. And I feel confident that with the new performance management system in place, that we will be able to collate and evidence performance, but we will also be able to demonstrate where there are critical issues that the Chief Constable will need to be taking action on.
Just to reassure you, I can provide the Commissioner with those figures, no problem. Commissioner, we can have them, and Commissioner can bring them here, no problem. We got that.
Okay, I think we finished there. We've covered a lot of stuff there very professionally from both sides of the tables, really. Thank you very much for that. We now move on to item 7, which is the Gwent and Crime Pan consultation paper on proposals for national representation. Can I ask the panel that we accept the actual the recommendations, their options 1, 2 and 3. Could I have a proposer and a seconder for option 2? Okay, so that's covered. Okay. And it's obviously that's a situation where we want to ensure that there is a national representation, and that's the way in which we'll follow there. Can we now move on to item 8, which is the Gwent Police Communications Suite Progress Report, which is 21 to 24.
So unlike the Chief, I don't have the same capacity to deliver a half-an-hour presentation without reference to any slides. So, I mean, one of the great things, one of the great advancements in policing since I joined is that we now have computers, so I am going to refer to some slides as we go along. Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for the opportunity to come and speak to you. Talking to the Commissioner's Office and the Chief, what we thought is that it'd be really useful to give you a bit of an insight into some of our operational kind of detail. Interesting to hear the points around performance, and encouraging for me to hear people who are not directly involved in policing to be challenging around the way in which we're assessing police performance, because what frustrates me, and I'm incredibly proud of the work that my team do in the communication suite, is that what the press tend to report is this single measure of how well we're doing on 101. And it is an issue, and I'm not trying to trivialise it. It is an issue. We don't get it right all the time, but the job is significantly more complex than that. And there's a huge danger if we apply single measures to policing and drive our activity based on that. And it's so what I want to get across is a little bit of insight for you in terms of what happens in my department. And through that, you should look at some of the demands that we're facing, some of the things that we're doing to address those demands, and in times of austerity and increasing demands and more complex types of things being reported to us, what we're doing to address that, what we've done already and what we're doing going forward. So happy to take questions as we go through. Just before I get into this presentation, I just wanted to pick up on one of the points around how we look after our workforce. And I've worked for Gwent Police for 21 years. I'm incredibly proudly part of this organisation because of the way it looks after its staff. And I know that's easy to say, but I had a member of my team leave the organisation a few weeks ago to go to a larger force closer to home. And 4 weeks later, he emailed me back and said, "Boss, I'd like to come back. Stuff the travelling. I'd like to come and work for Gwent Police again, because it's like being part of a family." We had another officer, an inspector, who joined us on transfer very recently. I spoke to him last week. He's going to be one of our bronze commanders. He came from a larger metropolitan force, which I won't name, down the M4 corridor, and he said, "I just cannot believe the difference between coming from a large force where I might not even see the chief super probably wouldn't even know my name, to come into Gwent, where everybody seems to know everybody." And I think that sense of family, that pride in what we do locally is really important. Okay, I'm going to struggle to see this screen. I'm going to turn it around here. So I think it's really important that we describe a sense of purpose for our teams in terms of what they're there to do, because that sense of purpose keeps them on track, and it describes them in no uncertain terms what it is that we want them to do. But that sense of purpose also relates to how we should assess performance, in my view. And what I'm going to do is just quickly rattle through these and just describe what I think our purpose is, and this is how I describe it to my team. Firstly, it is about answering the incoming call demands from the public. And the way the control room is configured is that we've got the team essentially split into two halves. Now, the one side of the room is what we call dispatch, and that receives our 999 emergency calls. And they are responsible for dispatching officers to all incidents, not just for the emergencies, but to all of the incidents that we dispatch them to. The second line that comes into the organisation is our 101, and this is for non-emergencies. So 999 is for emergency situations, those where there's a crime happening or somebody's at immediate risk, danger, or where somebody's injured, perhaps in a car crash. And the 101 is for the non-urgent stuff. This is for the lower level crime and antisocial behaviour, for want of a better term, and for general inquiries. And we also have an 838 111 number, which is our general kind of switchboard number, if you like, for the same kind of demands as 101. But we currently have the two numbers, which is something I will be reviewing as we go forward. So that's the first bit, and this is the bit that the public see in the press, is how quickly the police answer the phone. And I'll come on to how we're doing on that as we go through the slides. The second bit, really important bit for me, and this is something that's developed the last few years and is becoming more and more important, is how we assess the needs of the caller, the threat, the risk, the harm, and the vulnerability factors that person is presenting to us. Because When people ring us up, they don't tell us these things. We have to investigate over the phone, and we have to decide how we're then going to prioritise that particular call. So we train our call handlers now to ask specific questions about, okay, so exactly what is the nature of the abuse that you're reporting to us? Quite often, let's talk about a neighbour dispute as an example. So what exactly have they threatened to do? Who is the other person? And we take their details. Are there weapons involved? Has this been going on for a while? Is it something that's just happened for the first time? We ask about the people that are affected and the level of impact, and we effectively conduct an interview on the phone. Because if we don't, the risk is that job just goes in the list. And in the past, we've learned some very important lessons about how we respond to domestic abuse. And we get reports of 35 domestic abuse incidents or domestic incidents every single day. Some of those are, arguments that have blown up out of all proportion. And that's what we find when we get there. But quite often there is an abusive relationship underlying that. And it's really important. And this is something you can't count in numbers, is the quality of the questioning that happens at that first point of contact. Because at any one time we'll have about 200 jobs on the list that we have to prioritise and attend. And it's really important that we grade those correctly, and the detail really matters. I can tell you, if we could go through serious case reviews and the precise questioning of callers at first point of contact is really, really important. And so the next bit is about determining then the appropriate response. So our call handlers are trained to assess whether it requires an emergency 15-minute response, a priority 1-hour response, or whether it's a scheduled response, which might mean that we arrange an appointment with the caller, and it goes in our diary system, and we have diary cards in each area under force operating daily, or it goes in the queue and we get there as quick as we can. Some jobs, about 30% of what gets reported to us as an incident, we're able to resolve on the phone by giving advice and crime reference number, etc., for those lower level issues where people don't want us to do anything with it. They want it recorded for insurance purposes or just to have it logged in case this thing happens again. The next bit is about the management then of the police resources. This is the role of the control room. Very, very complex in terms of managing lifetime demands. They are constantly juggling 200 incidents. Okay, where are the resources? Which job are we going to next? And that's a really, really difficult job. Again, how do you measure that in terms of numbers? And then finally, to accurately record details of incidents and crimes. And we've talked this morning about the accuracy of crime statistics and the importance of that. There has been a shift in policing recently where we used to deploy officers to have a look at what was going on and then decide whether a crime had been committed. The culture now is very much we take on face value what people are telling us at first point of contact, and we'll record it then. And likewise, incidents, it's really important that we capture the details, whether we're deploying or not, because those details will matter down the line. And if I had time, I'd be able to describe to you in some detail about what that involves. But trust me, I remember 20 years ago in call handling terms, if somebody reported an incident to you, you put the basic details on the computer and you got somebody dispatched as quickly as you reasonably could. The world has moved on, and rightly so. So this is just a quick slide about what demand looks like, and the message here is that demands on policing are increasing. This is a national picture. These are the local figures. So you can see that in the year from 15-16 to 16-17, we had an increase of 6,930 treble 9 calls. That's 9%, and that's reflected across the country. In terms of 101 demands, in that 1 year alone, we saw an increase of 25,000 calls. And the sort of combined increase there is 31,000. So we took a total of 308,000 calls in a year. That's a huge demand on a small force. And, that represents an 11.5% increase in total. And now the proportion of calls that we received that are converted into police incidents is about, 63%. So there's 37% of calls that we receive are not actually about an incident. They're about general advice and guidance. So, to stay ahead of those demands, at a time of austerity, this is the single biggest challenge for policing. Is how do we shape the force to cope with these extra demands whilst our budgets are reducing? again, this is probably just a very quick summary. You know, we've had a new command and control system which helps us to prioritise. It allows us to see those 200 incidents much easier in terms of where our emergencies, priorities and scheduled calls are. That was an 18-month program of work to do that, and but we've now got a much better system that helps us dispatch officers. We've got a new, much more affordable digital telephony system with integrated voice recognition. Integrated voice recognition is where you ring our switchboard number and a computer will ask you who you want to speak to, and in a lot of cases it will be able to put you direct through without speaking to the human. It's a fairly basic system and we're working on it to try and improve it, but that's one of the developments. We've had a huge restructuring within the control room in terms of how we use our resources to make sure that we maximising the use of the human resources we got. Historically, we had people who were just dispatchers in the control room and people who were call handlers and people who did some investigative work on the phone. We've now combined those resources. We've trained them in all aspects of it and required them. We've changed their contracts so that they can do any of those roles. Now, that has meant that we've had to let some of our people go on early retirement because it just wasn't for them. They've been in the job an awful long time. The whole career had been based around dispatching, and it wasn't for them. So we gave them an opportunity to leave with some grace. What it has meant for us is that we've taken on about 70 new staff over the course of 18 months. We've got a team of 115 staff who are actually directly involved in doing the work. And so that's a huge turnover. And we've got a very enthusiastic workforce who bring a lot of experience from outside. But it means we've got to train and coach and support those people. And that's a big challenge for us. And we've reviewed flexible working arrangements to make sure that we strike the right balance between caring for our staff and their needs outside the organisation, but also making sure we're there to provide a service when we can. And we've reviewed every single member of staff's current working arrangements. We've got a new model for assessing threat, risk and harm, which is recognised nationally as good practice. As an example around the administration, if you like, demands on our team and how they've increased, it's really good for frontline officers to be able to look back at an individual's history, which is now within our new computer system called Niche. The reality is that that's meant an extra demand of 30,000 new records have to be created in my team every year, and that demand is taken from the front line. So it's freeing frontline officers up to do more of the responding and dealing, and we're doing much more on the phone up front to record those the details and actually do the administration. And when I'm talking about the administration here, if Ian Roberts rings the control room to report an incident, we make sure that we make a link between that particular incident record and Ian Roberts' master file record if he's previously contacted us, his contact number, the vehicle, the address. It all takes time. So actually the administration that goes with every incident is about equally as long as the call itself. I'm going to touch on what is typically reported around our service and the standards, and this is the performance in terms of numbers for July, our busiest month of the year by far. We had an 8% increase in treble nines and a 12% increase in 101s during July. It's also peak leave period, and our staff also take holidays during that time. So from a management point of view, it's very difficult. The reality for us then is that if you contacted Gwent Police in July, on average, in emergency situations, we answered the phone within 5 seconds. If it was 101 non-urgent issue, the average was 4 minutes and 1 second, which is double what we have been seeing of late. I can tell you for September, it's so far it's 2 minutes and 39 seconds for non-urgent matters, and for 838 treble 1, it was 3 minutes 43. Now with 101 and 838 treble 1, the calls actually come in 2 separate lines, but they come together and are handled by the same team of people. In terms of abandonment, the gentleman asked the question about abandonment. The figure does seem alarming, and it is something that we are actively looking at. The reality is that when people ring 101 or 838 treble 1, the first thing we do is we tell them where they are in the queue, so it gives them a choice about whether to stay on the line. And bear in mind, these are non-urgent matters, so the first thing is we give them some choice. The second thing is that we, aside from looking at the level of abandonment, I also look at the number of complaints we're receiving from the public, from the Commissioner's office, and and also the victim satisfaction surveys. And the latest victim satisfaction survey data shows us that 90% of people that ring us are satisfied with the ease of contact with the police. That's not to trivialise those people who say, look, we rang 101 and we couldn't get through and we were on the phone for an awful long time. That does happen. We don't get it right all the time. So,
come back on this about abandonment. So the abandonment number, you know who they are effectively because of
Well,
your record. And
yeah.
within your figures of 37,217 calls,
Yeah.
of which 17,000 logs, 10,000 of those really were never actioned at all because they were abandoned. Is that correct?
well, what we don't know is whether those people rang us back, you see, because
Oh, did they ring back? Yeah.
Yeah, what we tell them is that your position so-and-so in the queue. And what happens with 101, it's like the national grid, you know, when people leave work, we see a massive surge in demand. And so there are times during the day where, you know, we do have people waiting in that queue for much longer than we like. Through most of the day, our waiting times are much less than that, 4 minutes or 2 minutes as it is for this month. But when we look at our statistics in terms of incident and crime data, it's as much as it's generally rising, we don't see any particular patterns in there that would suggest that crimes are not coming through. What I was going to do with the next slide, I think it's the next slide, that this one here demonstrates that we get 21,000 calls a month, but every day, what this slide shows is where the 101 calls come in during the day. And you probably can't see the detail there, but what it says to me is that most of our demand is between 11 in the morning and about 6 in the evening. And within that, we see those peaks at lunchtime. Everybody rushes out, and they try and call the police at lunchtime, and we get the same sort of demand then at about 4 o'clock, between 4 and 5, which is a challenge for us to keep on top of. So we do also signpost people to our websites as well. So we assume because we don't know that a lot of those people that put the phone down are the ones who are ringing about the advice and guidance maybe, or want some other kind of service. And what we do monitor around abandonment is the average abandonment time. So at what stage during that call are people putting the phone down? Most people put the phone down within the first 60 seconds. There are a proportion of people who put the phone down beyond 8 minutes, and that's where I've got some concern. What we've recently done is introduced a new system now that helps us to look at call demand, and that software will allow me to identify which telephone numbers have called us and abandoned. And what I intend doing over the course of the next few weeks and months now that we've got an administrator in place to look after that system, is to call some of those people back to identify why they rang us and why they abandoned. I think that's really important. There are some dangers in that some people may be vulnerable and reluctant to call us in the first place, and by ringing people back, we could be speaking to the person that they wouldn't want us to speak to. So, do you know what I mean? So, but abandonment is an issue. We're very alive to it. People can speculate on what that means. I've got my own assumptions based on what I'm seeing. Perhaps the next slide might help to provide some context here. I sat down with one of my operators the other day, and the reason I put this on here is to demonstrate that quality of service counts for an awful lot, and the nature of some of the calls that are coming through. So the first call was about an HGV that had been blocking the road up in Gilwyn for a couple of days. Local council rang it through, and we spent sort of 5 minutes understanding what was going on there. The officer created an incident report and dispatched officers to go and deal with it. The second call here was about a member of the public wanting to speak to the chief inspector in Blackwood, and this is where, for me, quality service counts, because this person clearly wanted to speak to the chief inspector about something important. They didn't want to disclose it to the operator on the phone. So the officer didn't just transfer to their extension, and because I know they would have ended up with a mailbox message, you see. What happened was the officer spent time looking for the chief inspector and couldn't find them. They were in a meeting. So what the officer did was sent the chief inspector an email saying, this lady's rung, can you please contact her back? Now, in the past, what we may have done is just transferred them. So for me, whilst that's a very small example, that is how our people are serving the public. And the next guy rings in, lost his keys, so we searched the phone property system to see whether the keys had been found, and then we created a record to make sure that there was a record there of those lost keys. And we get calls about there's a lady here who wanted to report or wanted to speak to an officer about a rape that had been reported. she was outside the police station. So again, we spent time looking for an officer then to make sure that lady was spoken to. There was a gentleman who rang us saying that he'd just bought a new car, it hadn't been properly registered, and wanted to know if there'd been any speeding fines, because he thought he'd been caught speeding. He didn't know, but he thought he'd been caught speeding, and wanted to know were there any fines outstanding on the car. So we told the man, look, we'll go and speak to the guy you bought the car off, and if he gets a ticket, I'm sure he'll tell you about it. And then we had a lady who rang us to say, look, my garage was broken into yesterday. The officer came round. I didn't have the details of my car. I was parked on the drive. Here's the extra details. So that's a flavour of what we get on 101, okay? And don't get me wrong, at different times of the day, we will get different calls. So after sort of 4 or 5 o'clock, early evening, we start to get the calls about ASB. This is an example of what my team use, my supervisors and I use to just monitor what's going on in live time. So I think lifetime performance management is really important. Sitting there next to the callers, listening to the quality of service, and then monitoring activity. So what this shows, and you probably can't see it here, but those bars across the top show the number of operators that we've got. So we've got 17 operators in the room answering 101 calls at this time. And I got the snapshot off the computer the other day. What it shows me is that 3 of them were on their lunch break. The yellow ones, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them were doing the administration, and the rest, 9 of them, were active on calls at that particular time. So what it shows to me, the little green bar on the left is a 0, and that means that nobody's idle. And if you physically walk into the room and there's an open invitation for you to come in as a panel or as individuals at any time, you will see none of these people are idle. If they are not able to answer the phone, it's because they're helping somebody. And so that's an example of the kind of software that we've got there to manage performance in lifetime. Just want to touch on some of the things that we're doing currently and moving forward. I've mentioned already, we've got 70 new staff who are really eager and keen to serve the public. I spoke to a guy the other day who worked for the CPS for 10 years and has come to work for the police and loves the work that he does, the variety it offers and the way he's able to help people. And we had another guy who used to manage a professional cycling teams, now working for us, and loves the job. So, but we need to train and coach these people, and we need to support them in what they're doing in very difficult circumstances. For those that have been with us some time, we're putting things in place around a continuous assessment of their competence. I think that's really important. We don't just assume that because people have been with us for a long time that they are competent. We've got a range of tasks that we've defined that we want them to do. And some of that is quantitative, but a lot of it's qualitative. And we look at how well they're serving the public and some of the mistakes that they are or aren't making. We've made some changes recently with the call handling process itself, recognising the challenge around speed of answering 101s. So when we just restructured the department 12 months ago, the process was that if you were the call handler, you would do all the administration for that particular call. And for us, 6 months into it, we realised that that wasn't working properly. That wasn't the most efficient way of doing it. So what we've now got is the officers there and staff working in teams of 4. One will do the administration while the other 3 are taking the calls, and it has improved our speed of answer. We need to do an awful lot more about understanding the demand. Okay, we've seen that the demand's increasing. We've had conversations about the availability of other services to help the public. It's not all about the police, and we do get an awful lot of demand that maybe should be dealt with by other services. We've got a mental health professional working in the control room now, and we're looking to roll that out. And but we need to really get underneath that. You look at that list of demands. That was a random sample of demand. There's an awful lot of what I would call failure demand there. This is the stuff where people shouldn't be ringing us. They should be able to go to a website and get some self-help guidance and advice, or know that they can contact another agency for help and support. So key piece of work for me going forward is understanding the totality of that demand and how much of that is the failure demand where we've not done something or not done something right. For me, people shouldn't have to ring us back because we've not done something right. We need to get it right first time. A simple one is the officers who are going to jobs should be making sure that the person they are delivering a service to knows how to contact them. And the chief, I know, has put a huge effort behind the technology that officers have got and making sure that people are giving out their numbers. We need to move with the times, I think, and offer new ways for the public to contact us. There's certainly a demand out there for things like web chat. for low-level advice and guidance, for people to go online and to contact us. I know certainly there are vulnerable people in the community who haven't got the confidence to pick up the phone and speak to us. And maybe if we offered them alternative ways, they would contact us via web chat, and similarly video calling and online crime reporting, where somebody doesn't have to get in the 101 queue to give us the details. They input the details of their incident or crime, if it's a low-level issue, and we then pick it up and then decide on a response, and it reduces the opportunity for mistakes to be made in terms of spellings and locations and things of that nature, but it also reduces the demand on our operators so that we can still provide a good service. We do need to do more around raising awareness on the services we provide to the public, and let people know when the media are saying, my gosh, it took the police 2 minutes to answer the 101. We and the Deputy Commissioner have talked about this. We need to do an awful lot more to raise public awareness on the services we're providing, but actually the complexity of what we're dealing with and how we respond to it. And on the point of abandoned calls, yes, I mean, that is a piece of work for me to now to do, is to, now we've got the system, is to ring some people back and find out why people are putting the phone down. So that's it. I was going to suggest on the 13th of October, it's a Friday, an open invitation for the panel to come and visit the control room to see how it works in practice. I can be flexible. I've suggested the 13th of October. If that date doesn't suit for whatever reason, I can look again. We can choose an alternative date, and I'm very flexible around time of day. So I'm happy to do it daytime, office hours, or if you really wanted to see it at its busiest, early evening on a Friday would be good. But I'm open to suggestions. There's also an opportunity for any individual who wants to come in and sit next to a call handler and listen to the demand and look at the services provided. Please get in touch, and by all means we'll facilitate. So that's what I wanted to cover, Commissioner, Chair.
Can I say that I did visit the control room? It's a technological Aladdin's cave or nightmare, whichever way. But it's anyone that goes there, they want to go there, and it really opens your mind, doesn't it, in all sorts of ways. And it's important from your point of view that everybody out there realises the impact of the calls. Really, people tend to be in isolation, don't they? They don't realise, that's sort of an education. The other thing is, I think the panel would like to have that presentation, I think, if it's possible. Just send that to us. That's, absolutely. And can I say that just to finish off visiting that centre, it's amazing how professional you've got to be, really. I mean, a call centre is a call centre, but that's something different altogether, isn't it?
I just wanted to say that I think the increase in numbers is a positive thing. I think it shows the confidence that people are going to ring you, and the more that can be built up, the better it is, actually.
Yeah, in terms of the first question, of course I can share the presentation. There's nothing sensitive in there that couldn't be shared at all, so I'm happy to do that. And yes, it is complex environment, challenging environment. As an example, I was in there, I was Gold Command a few weeks ago, and I called in late on a Friday evening just to see the team there and have a cup of tea. And I was chatting away to one of the treble 9 call handlers, and the system lit up, and we had a treble 9 call, and it was somebody threatening to jump off the Maindy Bridge. And so the treble 9 call handler suddenly had to go into this mode where they had a person on the line who was trying to tell this person not to jump off the bridge, and at the same time they were directing resources from all around Newport to get there. And I watched in amazement at just the calmness that prevailed in that room at the time, and the chief inspector came over and the supervisor, and they worked as a team to get the resources there. And then 5 minutes later, once the matter was resolved successfully, thankfully, everything went back to calm again. And right, so, sorry, boss, what was it you were asking? And that was the nature of it. And I'm incredibly, impressed and proud, really, of the work they do in there.
I think it's worth noting as well, what's not shown on the figures there is the length of the calls. And please, if you really want to go into the control room, I've had the opportunity, I've never worked in the control room, but to sit alongside people, you're not getting people ringing up to change a Sky contract here. You're getting vulnerable people. You're getting, takes a lot longer you're getting people ring up who are extremely vulnerable, who sometimes cannot communicate. and it's really difficult. And to get one bit of information, to elicit one bit of information from someone who doesn't want to give their details but wants you to do something, but you can't do it until they give their details, it's almost impossible. I constantly take my hat off to these people. They're incredible. The calmness they deal with these issues throughout the emergency services, not just us, ambulance and fire, is absolutely incredible. First class operation, the amount of technology they operate, as you said, Mr. Guy, is second to none. It's incredible in there.
I think, Chair, that, when the members of the panel last visited, it coincided with the lorry carrying trafficked people into the Magor services, and you're able to see them being liberated, basically, from that vehicle.
Yeah, thank you very much for that presentation. I think it's really evidenced how much is going on. The point about the length of the call, I think, is key, and it comes down to setting people's expectations. You're 2 or 4 minutes or whatever waiting for a call for a non-emergency issue. Now, if you were waiting on the phone for a Sky contract or the electricity, you can still be waiting just as long, or to get through to Santander or whatever. And I think one of the key things around here is that we've been challenging the OPCC in one of the last meetings to say, look, what is happening with the performance? And you're right, it's not about the fact that it's 2 minutes or 4 minutes. It's about, and I don't know how you best do this, but it's about communicating in some way. The volume of calls that you're dealing with, it's not a 999 matter. So how do you evidence that? How do you get people to understand the length of the call? And what you've just explained, actually, in terms of, I'm ringing up to report something. What goes into that about weapons, are you on your own, that type of thing, people don't realise how long that actually takes. And talking to one person asking those questions will be very different to talking to another person and dealing with that. So you've put a completely different view, I think, in terms of what you've brought to the table today. And I think that's something the OPCC needs to be taking on board in terms of evidencing what you're doing around 101. 101 isn't all of it at all, but it's what people see. It's what you've been pushing people to. So that's what's uppermost in their minds. You're saying if it's not important, bring 101. So that's what people are thinking about. And I think this is what you as the OPCC need to be sharing in some way, the excellent work that's going on to say, this is what matters. Yes, there are abandoned calls. Yes, there are peak periods. Okay, the challenge back to you then I would expect to be along the lines of, what are you doing in those peak periods? At 4 or 5 o'clock when you're illustrating they're the highest, is there resource an issue around that? Do you need some overlapping shifts? Or whatever the answer may be. But how do you address that? So the waiting times are coming down. You may expect them to be higher in certain periods. And okay, within reason, that's acceptable, but I think that there's some work to be done about promoting that work. I think what you provided was really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. If I can come in on that point. I mean, very good points. In terms of the importance that the Commissioner's Office place on this, I meet with the Deputy Commissioner monthly and we talk through these issues in some detail. And likewise, I update the Chief through force performance every month as well as to where we're at with some of these issues. We have already talked about a media strategy around this. I've made some changes the last few months since I've been in post. And I wanted to see the effect of those changes and to really understand the job for myself and some of the demands before I went out and embarked on that media strategy. But Deputy Commissioner has absolutely suggested that me and her team and our force communications team put this message out to the public. There is stuff already out there on police.uk, but we need to localise that, and we need to do more of this kind of stuff really out in communities, I think, to help understand, because I do understand the individual frustrations that people feel from time to time. And when people do contact the local councillors and say, I was on the phone for 45 minutes, we will investigate that and we will deal with that on an individual level. And there is a bit of a perception here as well, in that we've had 3 complaints in July. We looked at each of them. One gentleman said, I was on the phone for 45 minutes, couldn't get an answer. Oh, rubbish. When we looked into it, he was actually on the phone for 3 minutes. And now we can interrogate the systems to find out exactly when people did ring us and how long they were waiting. And so I just ask you to bear that in mind. That's one of the messages you can take back there, is that that's not trivialising. That gentleman probably was a bit frustrated at the point, but even before he rang us, he had an issue. He'd had a bad day, and I know my daughter had a phone stolen from school a couple of weeks ago, and I had rung through 101, and I thought, oh, here we go. I was on the phone about 3 minutes before they rang. It was, she'd come home from school, and but and I could sense that frustration. I'm the head of the department, I knew exactly what was going on, and I was quite happy to go and sort it out for myself. But I thought if I go down there and it all starts, kicks off, I'm going to be in trouble here. So I'm going to have to take a local officer with me. But yeah, I do get, when people ring it up, they've had a bad day. They don't ring us, because it's a positive interaction. And so the longer they wait, the more frustrated they come. But for me, you've got to have a sense of balance in all of this, and there's a trade-off between picking up the phone really quickly and the quality of service.
If I could, Chair, agree absolutely with what's been said, and it is about balance as well. When I was first elected and began my public engagements, the commonest thing that was raised with me by far was 101 waiting times. And they were unacceptably long, and I raised the matter several times with the then Chief Constable Jeff Farrar, and work was done in terms of the software, in terms of staff training, the complement being brought up to full scratch, and we are now in an improved situation. But it is an issue of perception as well, and we do advise people to use the 101 service when it's appropriate, but I've been surprised on a number of occasions where the person in the meeting had complained that it took X number of minutes to get through, and I'd asked them if they could give me a summary of, well, what was the call about? And on one occasion, she'd seen a chap staggering out of a house he was covered in blood, which to me said, well, why didn't you try 999? Well, that's what I thought about afterwards. Right. And another chap, quite separately, he saw a lot of building material fall off the back of a lorry onto the road and blocking it. And again, 101, and he said, afterwards I thought 999, maybe. So, I mean, what we say to people is, if you see something that you think to be criminal or dangerous, it's 999. We don't want to put people at risk. So, if you see something like that, 2 or 3 minutes is probably too long. 5 or 6 seconds is probably going to make a difference.
Chair, can I say first off, we do have the ability to speak as long as the chief. I suppose, in reality, it's easy for us to stand here and it's easy for members of the public to throw stones at this service. What we have to remember is the people delivering the service are real people who have real lives, who are trying to do a professional job, and whose primarily their backs are firmly against the wall, because it seems to me that it's a never-ending pot. No matter how many people you put into the service, you're always going to be under stress. I think, secondly, I think you need to look at, and you touched on this, is the education. The presentation you gave now is worthy of a public presentation, and even though this goes out, the amount of people that watch this, I dread to think. I don't know. But education through schools, because school children, young adults, come home and they speak to their parents and they help to educate their parents. Community groups could do with this education as well. Community councils are another way of reaching local people. And all these groups can bring people in to hear the presentation. Councils, it just goes on and on. So the future is about educating people going forward, not expecting people who are at a certain age in life to know everything about logging on here, there, and everywhere else, because they don't. It's not going to happen. But the future is pretty good. When you look at the figures, I'm not a great believer in percentages or the way that we measure things, okay? Because we have a danger of making ourselves look making ourselves look failures. I mean, I've looked at these figures. We have 6,000 drop calls, just over, and the 838 treble 1, we have just under 3,000 drop calls. That's horrendous. But I haven't told you about the amount of calls that have been successful. I haven't broke down those drop calls, but I don't want to diminish them as well. I just think that it's the education will help us, and maybe as technology moves on, I think from my perspective, you will get my support for greater technology, for greater understanding, anything that makes life more efficient. So, as I said, it's easy. I have a confidence in you. You delivered a confident report. I could have come here and threw stones at you today, but I have no intentions of doing that just yet. I'll put them away, and I look forward to seeing this service progress in the positive way. And thank you for your report.
Thank you, Councillor Routley. I think that's a really helpful points to make, and thanks to the Superintendent for coming today and providing us with that in-depth report. I would like to just emphasise that obviously, I think on your slides, Ian, you had continuous improvement as being an absolutely critical part, and certainly in the monthly discussions we have, seeing the progress that is made is an important aspect. But what we also should be saying is if people have got genuine complaints or dissatisfaction with the service, then they need to be making those complaints and to be giving that feedback either directly to Gwent Police or to the Commissioner's office and through the Public Response Unit. So genuinely, we want to ensure that we continuously improve and that we meet the requirements of the public.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We've covered that pretty well. We now move on to the agenda number 9, which is the Police and Crime Commission for Gwent Annual Report 2016-2017, pages 25 to 58.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I'm glad you didn't throw those stones, because the Chief Constable would have arrested you and would have added to the crime figures. Can I just say thank you very much for this. Now, I don't intend to speak to the report other than a few opening remarks, because its publication is imminent. What you see, it says there, final draft. It is virtually. We have noticed one or two minor typos which we want to correct, and I want to change the photograph at the end of the report, which still has Jeff Farrar in it, because I think in terms of talking about the future, it should be the new Chief Constable there, so we're going to change that photograph. Other than that, this is the report of the first year of my office, which of course is largely against the former Police and Crime Plan, and that's why I refer to the work of Ian Johnson, my predecessor. But it's virtually ready for publication. If there are any questions on it, I'll happily try to take them. Chair?
Yeah, Jeff, right, there's two things. On page, sorry, it's regarding the animal welfare scheme on page 43. Surprised me that you got down that it was 9 checks, because we normally do a check once a month. We do on the dog section, and also it missed out that we also do spot checks on Waterton Kennels as well. The animal welfare visitor scheme does, and we go visit down Bridgend at least twice a year as well down there. So there was that. Also on page 30, this is something not to do so much for the report, but can we have this going forward, this information, what percentage of cybercrime is reported in Gwent Police? Because we are always hearing what the national figure is, what is the factual figure for Gwent Police, knowing what our statistic is on that one. And sarcastically, thank you for putting a photo of me like a drowned rat in this thing. Thanks on that one, Jeff. All right, that was it.
Thank you for those points. I do apologise if the photo is not quite as you might have liked, but I don't think you can improve on perfection, you see. So. Yes. Okay.
Just on the animal welfare, if you remember last year, we have had a meeting because not all of the visits were taking place. So No, it was 3 visits, didn't take place, so that's why we had a meeting with the animal welfare visitors.
Can part be added in though, because that is part of the role as well?
Sorry, I was just going to, I didn't catch what you just said, but we will sort out the cybercrime figures going forward, and they'll be included then in future reports. So did you say something extra just then?
Thank you, Chair. Page 30, given we've just been talking about 101, that it follows on. So it talks about the fact that you're monitoring changes. Oh, sorry, page 6 of your document, right. Page 30 of the pack, sorry. Yeah, so under priority 1 it's got the fact that you're monitoring changes to improve. When you look at page 21, or page 45, depending on your numbering, it talks about, by December 2016, 101 calls are being answered within a service response time of 60 seconds, and this picture continues to improve. That sort of goes completely against what we've been talking about, where you're saying it's 4 minutes currently, it's got to 2 minutes.
Was that at the time of that this relates to? This is the annual report.
Right, so the annual report is looking at the period 2016 to 2017. So the performance now is not improving from 60 seconds.
No, we'll need to reflect that, but this is up to May of 2017.
That's fine.
The first year of my...
Yeah, I understand that, but we're saying that at some point, we're saying that from then from May 16 to December 16, that 101 had improved to 60 seconds, to be an answer within 60 seconds.
We'll check that.
It's because it says by December 16, 101 calls were being answered within a service response time of 60 seconds. That doesn't seem right. If we're saying that it's currently 4 minutes in July and it's improving, we're not improving on 60 seconds. We're improving on 4 to 2 minutes. I think you need to look at that.
Which page is that figure?
Page 21 of
the report.
The actual document itself. Yes, 45 of the pack. So next to the picture, you're going to replace of Jeff.
Page 21.
So top section, third bullet point down that starts maintained to focus on improving. It's the last sentence there. So we're saying by December 16, 101 calls are being answered within a service response time of 60 seconds. And the picture continues to improve. I think you really need to look at how that...
Double check that.
Yeah.
And we can change it if it's wrong. It's not a problem.
I think if it is wrong, then it would be interesting to have a note back to the panel as to what it's going to be replaced by, because fundamentally that's one of the figures we're talking about, and the accuracy and that needs to be picked up.
No, absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, it's one of the reasons. Thank you. It's one of the benefits of bringing the report here before
fresh pair of eyes. Yeah, that's fine. I just think you need to look at that then. Page 23 of the document, the section Public Confidence and Victim Satisfaction. Those tables are really useful, and they're the sorts of things that we would expect to be looking at strategically going forward. So the Gwent results are below England and Wales averages, with no improvements in being shown. So going forward, what are the OPCC looking to do on that? And we'd certainly expect to work on that going forward. And, in terms of dealing with satisfaction, how confident are you that this can improve? So, for example, you can have situations where somebody rings in, they've rung in at a quiet time, for want of a better word, and they've been able to have an officer respond to their property. Then you can have a burglary which happens at a peak time. They ring in, they're given a crime number and told there's nothing more we can do. Here's your crime number for insurance purposes. They're going to be completely dissatisfied. And that could be based on the time they rang in, or it could just be based on the performance. Either of those people then get a call to say, from Gwent Connect, to say, how was your experience? The first person can say, oh, it was great, I had somebody turn up, it was marvellous. The second person is going to say, no, I don't want to talk to you, the response was awful, I'm not even going to raise a response. So I think, how are the OPCC going to look going forward that these are representative figures that are covering people that were at all the categories of victims of crime, irrespective of which day it occurred, and how are you going to make sure that it improves? Because you're in a very difficult situation to make sure it improves with the resources that you've currently got.
Well, those are very fair points. They're matters that we'll have to work on. And certainly in terms of Connect Gwent, we need to be sure that we've got the rigour in there to actually make these figures realistic. And certainly going forward, the new ways of working that we're beginning to identify with our performance review will inform future reports.
Yes, happy, Jill, to pick up the points. And we have regular meetings, obviously in terms of our accountability for the Chief Constable, in terms of victim satisfaction and looking across the board. I regularly meet with Jo Robinson, who's the manager of Connect Gwent and the Hub. Met with her yesterday, very much along the lines to consider how we continuously look at improving that service. And I think that there are two particular elements we were discussing yesterday. The first is ensuring that we continuously improve the actual service of Connect Gwent, that we ensure that we monitor performance and look at how we can improve that service to the public and, as you say, to all victims of crime who might require that service. The other aspect that were focusing on yesterday is ensuring that not only is Connect Gwent delivering, but every aspect across all of Gwent Police are actually thinking about how they support, engage and look after our victims, right the way through from the force control room to perhaps somebody who's attending an incident, and consider the wide aspect. And in a particular element, it refers back to some of the questions perhaps being asked earlier in relation to our training programme. So how are we ensuring when we've got new members of staff into the force control room, our new officers, our new PCSOs, that they really understand that culture that the Chief Constable talked about, and very much putting our services and victims at the centre of everything we do. So I think, again, it is about how we evidence the work that we do to hold the force to account and to provide that assurance that the performance management systems that we have collectively between Gwent Police and ourselves are focusing on trying to drive that continuous improvement.
Yes, I can tell you, you can have much more detail on that on victim satisfaction. It's only collected on certain areas of illegal crime, violent crime and dwelling burglary. And hate crime as well. It's only collected on 4 areas nationally. It's collected across 5 discrete areas in there as well. That is ease of contact, initial action, treatment, follow-up and whole experience. And then what you get there is whole experience in relation to all crime. It'll paint a different picture. Certainly with the dwelling burglary, you never get someone saying that they're not going to attend. It always gets attended. In relation to vehicle crime, bit of a different picture in relation to that. In relation to people's attendance, forensic opportunities. So what you'll find is with vehicle crime, it's always much lower because the initial attendance. Dwelling burglary, because you'll probably get that dealt with by a CID officer who'll spend more time, much better. With assault cases, very much depends what's happened. Has there been a charge? Has someone gone to court? There's a number of factors. You can fully explain those and give you the figures. No problem at all. They were held on a national basis for national comparisons. For some reason, that doesn't happen now. I think that is because they didn't want to drive towards figures. But it's an essential part of what we've done in relation to performance for a number of years now. But there are 5 discrete categories. 4 crimes, including hate crime, and then it's evaluated between victims of crime who are white and again BME. So the data is all there, no problem.
Just operationally, I guess control room are the first port of call in terms of deciding, whether to attend a job or not. And what I can say is that we base our decisions on that threat, risk, and harm and vulnerability consideration rather than what's the category of the crime that's being reported. So an elderly lady who's suffering antisocial behaviour is going to get a different response from somebody who's not vulnerable. And I think key to satisfaction is engagement and understanding expectation. So one of the questions within that Thrive question set is about, well, what action are you looking for the police to take with this? Because we assume what people want us to do. Quite often, a lot of times they just want some advice and guidance. So we would like to attend every single call as quickly as possible, but the reality is we just don't have the resources to do that, so we do have to prioritise. So threat, risk and harm and vulnerability, and engaging with the victim and asking what it is they're expecting the police to do with it, what would they like the police to do. If at that stage there's a conflict in terms of what the person is expecting the police to do and what we realistically can do, because there are lots of vehicle crimes where it's nice to send an officer for reassurance. The reality is that the value in sending an officer is very limited if there are no lines of inquiry that can come from that. So what we try and do at first point of contact is manage that expectation and say to people, this is the reason why. We might send a crime scene investigator to come and look for fingerprints, but we're not going to send an officer on this occasion. But if there's anything else you can tell us about this crime, come back to us and we'll reconsider.
I think that'll be an interesting point, actually, and it's about your ethos is protect and reassure, and what one person will want as reassurance is very different to another. And I think it's that in times where your resources are going to be tighter and tighter, and there can be other demands, you could have a big operation in Newport, it's how those calls and the people you're dealing with, so that when they come to victim satisfaction, that they feel they can fill it in with a negative response so that you can understand it, but that they take the time to respond. Just don't not respond because you didn't feel it was great. What's the point? They're not going to send a police officer. What's the point in telling them they didn't send when they already know that? And it's how you get into that information and how you look at it by area to sort of increase that reassurance. And even if it's not an officer's attending today, that would you like to come and talk to somebody? Would you like to come and talk to a neighbourhood officer? Would you? It's about giving people options, and I think that's what you're talking about. And I think it's how you communicate that to get that reassurance levels up when crimes are increasing.
And on that point then, quite often we'll notify the local neighbourhood team and CSOs so they can go and have a patrol strategy around that area where we're seeing several crimes being committed or ASB incidents. Rather than deploying to every single incident, we engage, and then we'll pass it on to the neighbourhood team to look at it.
Okay, thank you very much. We now move on to the finance report for year ending the 31st of March 2017. All these will be noted, and I'll give the reason at the end. Then we've got the Police and Crime Commission for Gwent, the budget setting table. We got the medium-term financial projections, 2018 to 2022. In chronological order, we go from pages 59 to finishing up with 1112, the Treasury Management Annual Report. As I said earlier, these will be noted. Darren Garwood isn't with us, obviously for good reasons, and we wish him well. All these matters can be clarified. Questions can be submitted from the panel and to the Police Commissioner. We can get written responses to the panel afterwards, and we can also include these things when we get them back in the agenda for December. So can the panel note these reports? Okay. Okay, show of hands.
No. I'm going to say I'm very grateful for that. If it gives the panel confidence, can I say that all four of these were put before the Joint Audit Committee yesterday at its meeting. The Joint Audit Committee, its functions is described on page 23 of the annual report. It's the body that is charged with overseeing the accounts and procedures of both the Gwent Police and the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner, and includes representatives from the Wales Audit Office. And they are content with the paper, so if that gives you some reassurance, hopefully that's helpful.
Yes, thank you very much for that. And we now move on to the last item on the agenda, which is our forward work programme.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to bring the panel's attention to the next meeting, which is planned for the 22nd of December. The items listed on there will obviously go forward if members are happy to endorse. And I just added in, based on the discussion today, is a report on sickness absence, linking into the wellbeing strategy. Would members want to add that into December, or would you want it for the January report?
One question I would ask is the 22nd of December a realistic date to meet? We'll have apologies, or should we look at another date?
The problem is we don't get the settlement we don't get the police settlement details until the week before. So that's why the date of this meeting has been moved closer to Christmas, unfortunately.
I think for the sickness report, that January would be okay for that.
So just for clarification, when will the January meeting be?
It's usually towards the end of January, but we will liaise with Darren regarding the availability of the reports, because it's mostly, it'll be finance reports. So obviously we'll be in touch as soon as possible, as soon as we've got a final date on that.
And Darren will be back in work at the beginning of next month, hopefully.
Okay, thank you very much for attending. It's been a long meeting. There's been a lot of questions, a lot of professional information. And can I say that we've done our best to be professional in all sort of ways, and obviously you've done your bit as well. And there was a comment made: there's two people here who can talk for Wales, really. Yeah, the meeting is closed. Thank you.